From the top rope and the Great American Bash, I bid you all good evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you may be in this great land of ours or around the world. Welcome to the $55 million studio on the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're a longtime fan reliving these monumental events or a newcomer eager to understand wrestling's rich history, you're in the right place. This episode is packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises along the way. Let's get into this issue. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. October 25, 1999 Observer Newsletter. WWF No Mercy Review. Vince Russo's first WCW Monday Nitro. The new era of WCW television began on October 18th in Philadelphia, with Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara's first Nitro. There was no mistaking the fingerprints even if viewers didn't have that fact drummed into their heads from early in the show. Far more detailed work was done in scripting the show than at any Nitro in recent memory and possibly ever. Time will tell, but after the first show my feeling was that when Nitro was in its heyday with a good undercard wrestling climaxing with the star power matches on top, it was a far better 3-hour show than this was. However, this was better than the majority, but not all, of the recent Nitro shows. The throwing so many angles at people burns out the audience faster than wrestling matches do, and by late in the show, the crowd reactions were similar to Raw, in that the crowd was dead for the wrestling. This show was very entertaining for the first hour and entertaining still for the second hour. By the third hour, even though there was nothing wrong with the show, it was evident this style of booking doesn't translate well into the 3-hour format. Fortunately, it appears most likely if not a certainty that Nitro will be cut back to 2 hours in January. After the October 11th show proved to be the lowest rated Nitro in years and set the record for the widest ratings gap between the two shows, the gap closed greatly for this show. Nitro was up almost 0.7 points in 1 week, to a 3.30 rating, 3.77 first hour, 3.11 seconds hour, 3.05 third hour, and a 4.9 share. Raw fell by a similar margin, doing a 5.39 rating, 5.53 first hour, 5.27 seconds hour, and an 8.0 share. Over the head-to-head 2 hours and 6 minutes, Raw's 5.39 bested Nitro's 3.03, doubling them in only 2 quarters, as opposed to in every quarter the previous week and tripling them in several quarters. Nitro's increase was mainly from a 45-minute period starting with Billy Kidman vs. David Flair, Mona vs. Medusa in a stripper match and Sting vs. Bret Hart in a WCW title match, which drew 3.3, 3.2 and 3.5 quarters, much better than WCW had been doing in head-to-head periods in recent weeks. After the Hart-Sting match, which drew WCW's quarter-hour rating to within 1.6 points of WWF, its closest margin in months, Raw had Test vs. Bulldog at 5.1. WCW's rating dropped every quarter hour for the rest of the show, indicating, as many noted once the show was over, that there was something about throwing so many angles out there early that made the show drag in the third hour. Raw's strongest quarter was a 5.9 for Godfather vs. Viscera, and for interview exchanges involving both Mankind and Rock, and also China and Jericho. Raw was probably hurt more than Nitro by the combination of both the NFL game being the New York Giants vs. Dallas Cowboys, which drew a well below average 12.13 rating and 19.7 share, probably hurt more by baseball than wrestling, and the Major League playoffs on Fox being the New York Yankees vs. Boston Red Sox. WWF, which is strongest in New York, was clearly going to be hurt more than Nitro with 2 New York teams in national games head-to-head. In the battle of the main events, Raw with Rock and Mankind vs. the Hollies did a 5.43 final quarter and 5.58 overrun period. Nitro headlined by Goldberg vs. Lex Luger did a 3.23 overrun, but that was with 3 minutes at the end going unopposed, so the real head-to-head rating was closer to a 2.9. Backstage the feeling appeared to be mixed as to the show, but it should be a far more competitive product once the show moves to 2 hours. The show was still disorganized, with a lot of wrestlers confused about things, not liking other things, but also realizing things were improving and more people were going to be added to the mix and stars will be attempted to be created. Wrestlers didn't know if they were supposed to be the faces or heels in segments, as witnessed by Flair thinking he was the heel against the Filthy Animals in their segment, and the Filthy Animals thinking they were turning heel against Flair by jumping him, resulting in a confused crowd which sided with Flair since they went 4-on-1 on him. Nobody could get straight answers and that segment apparently changed 5 different times during the show. Most of the non-wrestling segments were done in pre-taped segments before the show started with 3 crews working at a time, one headed by Ed Ferrara, one by Kevin Nash, and one by Bill Banks, a former WWF magazine and website writer who left this past week and started with this show, debuting along with Jeff Jarrett. There were scripts handed out far more detailed than anyone had in the past, and nobody was doing interviews not at least having an idea of what they were supposed to be saying, far different from the past where guys were sent out with no preparation and winging it, and new characters, most notably Kimberly, Buff Bagwell, Jarrett, and the Filthy Animals seemingly in line for big pushes. They did several WW Fish segments that it didn't appear anyone liked. One was an evening gown match with Medusa versus Mona, where Medusa did an interview. This was scripted, saying she was a real athlete and didn't want to take the shortcuts of losing her clothes to get ahead in wrestling. Fans having been weaned on WWF matches where the loser parades around in sexy bra and panties booed heavily when Medusa lost, being stripped down to a tame aerobics outfit, although one has to believe they knew what the reaction would be to this finish and it was part of a long-term plan. The most controversial were segments designed both to put over Buff Bagwell and also to set up the Hulk Hogan angle on the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view on October 24th. Bagwell did an interview first proclaiming himself as a new superstar based on all the various internet interviews that Vince Russo had done talking that point up. Again, it is clear they are booking with the idea that the entire wrestling audience is on the internet. Russo's name was brought up early in the show as they were trying to get over the idea it was a new WCW, plus they need his name over for future angles both on the show and on the horizon. Bagwell then came out later in the show without his gimmick, wearing an "I'm doing a job" face, wrestling La Parka in a grudge match from Thursday, and doing nothing on offense and visibly showing he wasn't allowed to, and making Parka look like an idiot, and then laying down for the pin, getting right up and going something to the effect of, "Russo, did I do the job right?" They shot to backstage where the undercard wrestlers watching the monitor were popping, seeing the bigger star have to lay down for the underused foreigner who gets no respect. At this point Jarrett ran in and clocked Bagwell, with the guitar, with Jarrett saying he's actually the chosen one because he's closest with the guy who has the stroke. This angle was done in this manner to create the idea that there is a booker who tells people to lose, since the original plan, which may be changed since they book for the internet and this will get out before the match, was something along the lines of Hogan versus Sting, with Hogan doing the same thing, trying to exercise his creative control and refusing to do the job for the match. Somehow Russo, or whomever will play the Vince McMahon role, will get his way at the end and Hogan will leave, only to come back later as an anti-authority babyface a la Steve Austin, or how Russo would have scripted a return of Bret Hart to the WWF had he had the chance. Sting's interview building the Hart matchup seemed to be Russo still trying to fight the fight about Montreal, with Sting saying how it's wrestling and in wrestling everyone gets screwed and lied to, almost trying to make it as this perversely romantic thing about the business. The plan is also to temporarily finish up Ric Flair on the pay-per-view, a role Flair isn't happy about at all. At press time they were going to change Flair versus Page to a strap match, which would end with Flair taking such a beating he'll be stretchered out and hospitalized and said to be injured to the extent he'll never wrestle again. The idea Flair was told was that they would bring him back in a few months in the figurehead president role, presumably as a heel. That worked so well the first time, right? And would probably wrestle occasional matches in that role. So Flair's career in WCW is scripted to basically end with him getting rolled and humiliated on Nitro, and coming back and getting stretchered out by Page, one of two people in the company, the other being Shane Douglas, that for personal reasons he was against putting over. There will be more emphasis on women, particularly those not adverse to taking most of their clothes off, and Tori Wilson has the potential as a marketing goldmine, but I can also see politically where Kimberly may somehow manipulate her way into the Sable spot. Jarrett's WWF contract expired on October 16th, but he came back for one last show to put Chyna over in the IC title match at the No Mercy pay-per-view the previous night in Cleveland. Both Jarrett and even WWF pretty well made Jim Ross, who handles contract negotiations for the WWF, into the scapegoat for Jarrett leaving. Jarrett had signed a 2-year contract with the WWF at $350,000 per year, selling them on the idea he was 30 years old with 12 years experience and primed and ready to jump from WCW and be a superstar. They initially pushed him as one, but it didn't work. They tried character after character with him, which never paid off, and in competitive segments when the Raw was close, Jarrett was a ratings liability. Somewhere during this period, Jarrett was pressured, convinced, whatever, to take a pay cut to a $250,000 base, which he obviously resented. Although with the WWF booming, he actually was on line to earn probably more than even his previous $350,000 base this year. Finally, his tag team with Owen Hart did well, largely due to the fascination with Deborah's implants. Russo was tight with Jarrett, wanting to program him with Austin and thus make him one of the top stars in the company. Austin, feeling Jarrett wasn't over enough and didn't want to take himself down to Jarrett's level, nixed the feud, causing bitter feelings all around when McMahon and Ross both backed Austin instead of Russo. There are different versions of Austin's mindset, some saying that Austin was more than willing to work with Jarrett provided Jarrett got himself over to close to his level. Others tried to portray it as due to personal reasons dating back many years, Austin wasn't going to help Jarrett out and refused to work with him at all. Those closest to Austin have the story closer to the former. Jarrett in this way was similar to Chris Jericho when Bill Goldberg refused the program with him, which played a key part in Jericho leaving, although there are notable differences. Jericho was showing signs of getting over without a push, and Goldberg, while super popular, had never had a program, and this wasn't exactly going to be an even program. In Jericho's case, it was clearly older wrestlers wanting to make sure the younger guys didn't break into their pack. With Jarrett, the fact was he was a guy who was a good worker and has had chance after chance, and Austin felt he wasn't at his level. As it turned out, Jarrett got some heel steam with a woman-beating angle. Jarrett was asking for $400,000 and $450,000 guaranteed downside over 2 years to stay, which is apparently what he got from WCW and what Titan ultimately matched, roughly the same pay category as Jericho was getting, but not until after Russo left, and probably not until the realization that he had the IC title and could have embarrassed them, leaving without doing the job, after seemingly not being interested in him at anywhere near that price. But then he'd already really made his decision to go with Russo, who needed his own political allies in the dressing room in shark-infested waters. On October 15th, after being incommunicado most of the week, Jarrett talked with McMahon and seemingly both put the heat on Ross for the negotiations falling through, and Jarrett agreed to work the pay-per-view and drop the title, and in return, WWF praised him publicly and claimed the departure was due to a contract dispute with Ross. Banks, in his early 20s, who had worked with Russo on the magazine and in doing some script writing, also left WWF for WCW this past week. In addition, Matt Miller, who headed up third-party bookings for the WWF, left to take a job in arena management at the Gund Arena in Cleveland, and Bob Mitchell, who played a strong role in the growth of the WWF's website, left for another new media position. In the wake of the departures of Russo, Ferrara, and Jarrett, Vince McMahon began ordering all employees, not just talent, whether under contract or not, to sign a letter stating that upon leaving WWF for any reason, including being fired, they could not work for WCW, or for that matter, any Time Warner company, for the period of 1 year. Most, but not all employees, signed that contract. Whether this will hold up in court is questionable, since WCW and its contracts with Darren Matthews, Steve Regal, Paul White, Big Show, and Chris Irvine Jericho also had 90-day non-compete clauses after the end of the contracts, but WCW failed to enforce the clauses, and White and Irvine started with WWF immediately upon the expiration of their WCW deals. The technical difference may be that Georgia, where WCW contracts are executed, is a right-to-work state. However, if WWF employees are living in Georgia, that same right-to-work standard could apply, rendering the paper meaningless. Non-compete clauses aren't unusual in competitive industries of this type. Typically, for example, in major markets in broadcast news, there is a 90-day period from the time an on-air personality leaves a station to when they can appear on a competing station. Terry Taylor, who had headed the group in charge of writing the WWF television shows since Russo's departure, had, as of the weekend, refused to sign the non-compete clause, which spread rumors that he was WCW bound. He was at the WWF tapings in Columbus, Ohio, and was scheduled for a meeting with McMahon on October 20th, where he was apparently looking for a deal which would give him more long-term security. Perhaps the biggest sign that while things have changed on the surface, behind the scenes there is a lot of communication work needed was on the Nitro opener with Juventud Guerrera versus Evan Courageous. The two were out there for just over 2 minutes when Bret Hart came out to do an interview. Neither Guerrera nor Courageous, nor the referee, were told ahead of time that Hart was coming, which is why they seemed so confused as to what to do, not knowing if they were to sell for him, except he never attacked them, or if they should attack him, which they didn't, so they just stood there. Paced by what may have been the best American match of the year, the World Wrestling Federation put on probably its strongest overall pay-per-view show this year with the No Mercy card on October 17th at the Gund Arena in Cleveland. Before an advanced sellout crowd of 18,752 fans, 17,430 paying $478,156, plus another $130,303 in merchandise, Edge, Christian and the Hardy Boys took a big step toward being recognized as something more than people in the pack. garnering a standing ovation for their ladder match, which featured a series of creative and high-risk spots built around the ladder. Even with one of the stronger main events of the year, with WWF champ Hunter Hearst Helmsley finally garnering his long-awaited win over Steve Austin when Rock's interference backfired, it was the younger wrestlers who left the lasting impression and were the subject of the buzz after the show. The finish was designed to build up a three-way match with Helmsley, Rock and Austin for Survivor Series on November 14th in Detroit. 1. Godfather Charles Wright pinned Mideon Dennis Knight in 7:31. Based on the angle which aired on SmackDown that week, it appeared to be a build for Godfather versus Viscera, who left Godfather laying, but the change was for the better. With Viscera, it would have been a horrible match instead of simply a bad one. The idea to open with Godfather is because his ring entrance always gets a nice pop. Viscera interfered freely. No heat for the match. Finish saw Viscera try and bodyblock Godfather into the post, but he moved and Viscera crashed into the post. In the ring, Godfather threw a body block into the corner, the Ho Train, and finished with a schoolboy. 1/4 star. 2. Fabulous Moolah Lillian Ellison became the oldest recorded champion in WWF history, at age 72, pinning Ivory Lisa Moretti in 3:01 to capture the women's title that she first won in 1956, which is before any other wrestler in the ring on this show was even born. No heat for the match. Of course, the wrestling was unbelievably bad, but there was something about the atmosphere that made the match palatable. Maybe it was the amazement in seeing 76-year-old Mae Young take bump after bump. How she hasn't broken in two is beyond anyone's comprehension, but I guess it just goes to show she's as tough as her reputation. Ivory did a splash spot where she missed to the left when Moolah never moved. That was the silliest looking spot on pay-per-view this year. Moolah later did a splash off the bottom rope and was supposed to miss Ivory, who didn't move fast enough and got anyway. Mae Young took bumps off the apron once from a clothesline and the second time from a drop kick. Actually a real good bump. Moolah was in slow motion, but her forearms blows look more real than the punches thrown by half of the younger wrestlers in the business today. Ivory tried a tope on Moolah, seemed to get caught diving through and fell straight down and barely grazed her. Finish saw Ivory hit Young with the title belt and she took yet another bump off the apron, but this gave Moolah a chance to deliver the slowest schoolgirl in history for the pin. -1 star. 3. Bob, Robert Howard, and Crash, Aaron O'Grady, Holly beat the New Age Outlaws, Brian James and Monty Sopp, via DQ in 10-11. A lot better than most WWF undercard matches. Everyone had their working shoes on and Bob Holly was very impressive, including throwing a perfectly timed high dropkick. The match got intermittent heat early through Road Dogg's gyrations. Dogg used a top rope superplex on Bob. Billy Gunn got a strong hot tag and the crowd even reacted big to it, giving both men press slams and then used the jackhammer on Crash for a near fall. Bob got a chair and threw it into the ring, but Billy grabbed it and gave Crash the famouser on the chair. The ref saw the chair and DQ'd the Outlaws. After the match, Road Dogg looked like he really was doing it doggy style to Bob and gave the pump handle slam to Crash. 2 3/4 stars. 4. Chyna Joni Lauer won the IC title from the departing Jeff Jarrett in 8:37 of what was billed as a Good Housekeeping match, which was a street fight with household appliances. They had advertised Deborah as being in Chyna's corner and Deborah never appeared on the show. It was mainly weapon shots, but the build of the match was good, the timing was good and it had crowd heat. Jarrett did a hell of a job in his final appearance. Mainly Chyna used weapons such as a garbage can and toilet seat. She stuffed a banana in his mouth. Chyna jumped off the apron through a table when Jarrett moved. Jarrett whipped Chyna with a fish, causing Lawler to make the fish smell jokes. Jarrett hit her with garbage can shots. Chyna took a Harley race bump over the top rope to the floor. Jarrett went to throw flour, but she kicked his hand and got flour in his face. Actually, both were covered in flour. Miss Kitty was making a concoction with milk, flour and eggs but wound up wearing it. She must be attractive because even after wearing it she looked good. Some of these glamour women don't look nearly so good when the makeup gets washed off. Jarrett got the figure 4 but Chyna made the ropes. Chyna used a low blow and salad tongs to the groin. After yet another garbage can shot, Chyna threw 2 pies in Jarrett's face. Jarrett catapulted her into Teddy Long, then hit her with the title belt and got the pin. Jarrett appeared to be the winner, which must have shocked a lot of people. Long then ordered the match restarted since a championship belt is not a household appliance. After the match restarted, Jarrett put the figure 4 on Long, allowing Chyna to crack him with a guitar shot for the pin just 13 seconds after the restart. Like a guitar is a household appliance. Since Jarrett was leaving, Miss Kitty left with China. I don't even want to think about that one. 3¼ stars. 5. Rock, Dwayne Johnson, pinned British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, in 7:20. Rock phoned the match in. Match, even with Rock, had no heat until the trademark moves at the finish. Bulldog took virtually all the bumps, but didn't look good. He had trouble with his power slam, with Rock getting his leg on the ropes to break the pin. Finish saw clean as a sheet with the Rock bottom and People's elbow. 1 stars. 6. Matt and Jeff Hardy won the ladder match over Christian, Jay Russo and Edge, Adam Copeland in 16:30. A must-see match because if any of these guys make it to the top, it'll be remembered as their first great match. Gangrel was booted out early. They set up 2 ladders instead of 1, and the ladders appeared lighter than previous ladders used, so some of the ladder spots probably didn't hurt as much as they would have in previous matches. It was more a collection of spots as opposed to a match, but the fans loved it once they realized the risk the guys were taking to entertain them. The crowd reaction was more to an exhibition of stunts as opposed to drama of a wrestling match. Christian used a plancha onto Matt after a series of bumps out of the ring. Christian walked up the ladder and dropkicked Jeff. Edge missed a tackle hitting nothing but ladder in the corner. Christian did a reverse DDT from pretty high off the ladder. Matt back suplexed Christian off the ladder. Edge was climbing the ladder and Jeff gave him a missile dropkick knocking him off. With Edge under the ladder, Jeff came off the top with a somersault senton. Jeff, who, if his body holds up, will someday be a Shawn Michaels caliber performer, leapfrogged over the standing ladder, about 7½ feet, with the highest leg drop this side of Bull Nakano off the cage onto Christian. Matt moonsaulted the ladder with Christian underneath. They did a series of low blow spots on Matt using the ladder to the groin. Edge used a downward spiral, Kenyon's flatliner, from more than halfway up the ladder. Matt used a neckbreaker off the ladder on Edge from high up. This appeared to be the most dangerous of all, because the slightest bit of a timing problem on that one would have been it for Edge. Villano 4 needed neck surgery after a far safer double-team version of the same spot was mistimed. Christian hip-tossed Jeff off the ladder. With the ladder set up like a teeter-totter, Jeff came off the top rope with his butt onto ladder to create a teeter-totter motion, and the ladder on the other end crashed into Matt, his own partner, and Christian. All 4 men climbed the 2 ladders for the climax spot. As they were fighting on both ladders, one ladder tipped over with Christian falling off and crotching himself and Jeff catching his throat on the top rope. The other ladder tipped over similarly, with Edge catching his throat on the top and Matt landing with his stomach on the top rope and going to the floor. They slowly started climbing again. 1 ladder went down and 3 of the 4 guys went down. Jeff had to jump from the falling ladder to the one left standing, was the only guy left, and grabbed the bag of money to win, and then celebrated backstage with new manager Terry Runnels. The fans gave the match a standing ovation. 4½ stars. Rock came out for an interview, but Triple H attacked him with a sledgehammer to set up the reason for the main event finish. They carried Rock out on a stretcher and showed him in pain, refusing to be taken to the hospital. 7. Val Venus, Sean Morley, pinned Mankind, Michael Foley, in 9:26. Mankind did a vignette before the show basically for Venus to jump him in the bathroom and also to get his book plugged. He brought the book out with him. They never plugged the movie. I think that means that Vince McMahon probably really didn't like it that much. McMahon, who is one of the few people to have seen an advanced copy, claimed he thought it was good but that it wasn't the kind of movie he'd have made because he'd want more of a happy ending. Mankind was under the weather and with the mask was having a hard time breathing. And he moves pretty slow but took his trademark sick bumps. Venus did a good job here. Venus back suplexed Mankind basically through a chair. Mankind got Rocco but Venus got it back and put it back in his trunks. Mankind got the claw on twice but Venus broke it both times by backing him into the post. Venus went for a chair shot but ref Teddy Long stopped him. Venus used a Russian leg sweep on the chair followed by a bulldog and an elbow off the top before missing the money shot. Mankind got a double arm DDT for a near fall and pulled out Socko. Venus pulled out Rocco. Mankind put the Socko claw in the mouth while Venus got the Rocco claw on the groin. It was Mankind who fell backwards and Venus got the pin. Apparently this match drew far more attention on TV than live, as a woman was undressing during the match, and the crowd circled around her not allowing security to take care of it. Most of the crowd reactions during the match and the background chants that didn't make sense were for that. After the match, Mankind got Rocco back. 2½ stars. 8. X-Pac, Sean Waltman, won the Four Corners elimination match over Kane, Glenn Jacobs, Farouk, Ron Simmons, and Bradshaw, John Layfield, in 10:08. Match had no heat this late in the card. There was something missing with mistimed spots with Kane against the Acolytes. It was never made clear this was elimination rules as opposed to the typical WWF rules of the first pin. Kane pinned Bradshaw with a choke slam at 8:25 and everyone thought it was the finish. X-Pac then came off the top with a spinning heel kick and pinned Kane, although Kane threw him off and it didn't look like a pin. X-Pac versus Farouk saw X-Pac DDT him on the floor. He went for a Bronco Buster in the ring but was caught with a Spine Buster. Farouk came off the top ropes for a shoulder block but X-Pac caught him with the X-Factor for the pin. The finish was mistimed badly enough that the crowd was flat for it. After all the months of building to the finish where X-Pac would finally pin a big guy, the crowd could have cared less when he did so. 1.5 stars. 9. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Paul Levesque, retained the WWF title pinning Steve Austin and Steve Williams in 21:53 in a no-holds-barred match. Helmsley came out with a sledgehammer. Vince McMahon tried to take it from him but Helmsley decked him. If Helmsley doesn't get over after decking McMahon and having both Rock and Austin down at the finish, he never will. It was the same start as in every Austin match with an intense brawl in the entry area. Austin hit Triple H with a garbage can and they ended up brawling in the stands with Austin delivering numerous crutch shots. Austin suplexed Triple H on the floor and maneuvered the camera to crack Triple H in the head. Austin, still in the stands, catapulted Triple H into ref Mike Chioda. I knew the ref was in trouble when it was the main event and it wasn't Earl Hebner. They finally got into the ring at 7:30. Austin hit the stunner but no ref. Chioda struggled back up, took a bump off the apron and hit the barricade, a real good bump, and he was done for the evening. Triple H hit the pedigree but no ref. Actually Hebner did the run-in at this point but Austin kicked out. Chioda was carried out, and by this point Triple H bladed. Austin threw Triple H into the steps. While brawling outside, Triple H hit Austin with a ring bell and suplexed him on the Spanish announcing table. It didn't break the way it probably was supposed to. Triple H clipped Austin and began wrapping his leg around the post. Austin fired back after a superplex with about a dozen chair shots to Triple H's knee, copying the post-match spot at SummerSlam and giving him his retribution. Triple H hit a low blow when Rock, who was near death 20 minutes earlier, but fine by this point, came out with his ribs taped carrying a sledgehammer. He went to hit Triple H, who moved, and hit Austin in the knee. Triple H delivered a pedigree to Rock and then pinned Austin to retain the title. After the match, Austin went after Triple H till he wasn't left in defeat, punching him all the way to the back, and gave him a low blow until Chyna grabbed Triple H and threw him in a limo and they drove off. Excellent main event. 4 stars. With its scheduled meeting with the World Wrestling Federation at the end of the month, the future of the Dream Stage Entertainment Pride promotion, which has become generally speaking the #1 shoot promotion in the world, is in question. At the same time, the group is negotiating with the WWF for talent for its upcoming Tokyo Dome shows, which would have to be worked matches. They are also talking to many of the top real fighters in the world for participation in the tournament on the same shows. WWF officials turned DSE down flat when requesting talent to appear on its last show in what WWF officials were told would be shoot matches. WWF wasn't even interested in hearing a price mentioned because after the Brawl for All experiment, they've learned their lesson in regard to putting wrestlers not trained in shooting in that environment and the injury risks from doing so. DSE has in its past promoted shows with a varying percentage of worked and shoot matches, generally all shoot undercards with occasional worked matches with predetermined outcomes to protect the two big Japanese drawing cards, pro wrestlers Nobuhiko Takada and Naoya Ogawa. Takada has been given several wins, but also had to face reality in 2 matches with Hickson Gracie headlining Tokyo Dome shows, and a recent match with Mark Kerr appeared to be a controlled situation where Takada lost but wasn't put in danger of being hurt. Previous Pride shows before DSE was running them also protected several fighters including Koji Kiao, a now retired pro wrestler who had a great deal of mainstream name value. But the majority of its matches have been of the shoot variety, and because they are the highest paying shoot promotion in the world, their shows feature the biggest names and the most looked forward to matches. The next show, on November 21st at the Yokohama Arena, has several intriguing matchups but neither Takada or Ogawa are announced for the show, which means it'll be tough to draw the masses. Pride has drawn more than 10,000 fans on its previous 2 shows in the building at high ticket prices. Whether because the costs of putting on shoot shows are far more expensive than work shows, the shows can break even or not with that kind of attendance figure, throwing in pay-per-view rights and eventual videotape sales as well into the equation, is unknown, but appears to be doubtful, or else the company wouldn't be looking to the WWF. But more importantly than its next show are plans for both a January 30th and a yet unannounced date in March, both at the Tokyo Dome, for a 16-man tournament built along the lines of the very successful K1 Grand Prix tournament. Rival promotion Rings is doing a similar base tournament, but it appears with lesser name value fighters. Royce Gracie has already publicly talked about doing the tournament, which would have 8 first-round matches on January 30th, and the 8 winners would go into a grueling one-night tournament in March. Even K1, which is far bigger than MMA style as far as mainstream popularity in Japan, saw its first round of the Grand Prix held on October 3rd in Osaka wind up disappointing at the gate and drew a far smaller television rating than the previous year. Pride officials along with Takada are supposed to meet with the WWF about involvement in the tournament. But how can WWF wrestlers Takada, Ogawa, Igor Vovchanchyn, now generally considered as the #1 heavyweight fighter in the world after his no contest against Mark Kerr last month, and Royce Gracie all exist in the same tournament without it being a total fiasco? And where, possibly, would Ken Shamrock, whose name hasn't been mentioned publicly but it would make sense would be in the hunt for something like this, still under a WWF contract but wants to do this style fighting next year, fit into all this? We know feelers have been sent but that nothing is close to confirmed. A Gracie vs. Shamrock first round match, long been thought to be impossible to put together, would make for an incredibly marketable match if it's bracketed that way, and with the dome to fill, they'll need more than just 16 fighters in a tournament. WWF officials were told that DSE wants to move away from the shoot style and get into promoting pro wrestling, which probably tells you what you need to know about the profit margin or lack thereof on recent shows, with the feeling that market is ripe for WWF style with its expanded television lineup in the country, and the traditional Japanese styles promoted by All Japan and New Japan now faltering at the gate. 6 matches have been announced for the November 21st show, headlined by Kerr vs. Ensign Inoue, who are facing off as the main eventers on all the print ads for the show. Kazushi Sakuraba vs. Royler Gracie, Alexander Otsuka vs. Henzo Gracie, Mark Coleman vs. Ricardo Moraes, Karl Malenko vs. Alan Goes, and Daijiro Matsui vs. Wanderlei Silva. They are also looking for an opponent for Ogawa as a match to sell tickets. Kerr vs. Inoue matches up top-ranked experienced heavyweights, with Inoue's 90 seconds win over former UFC champ Randy Couture showing he's dangerous against a world-class wrestler. Sakuraba vs. Royler, as mentioned last week, is a strange match since Royler is probably pound for pound the best fighter in the family, but at 147 pounds, facing 190-pound Sakuraba, who is considered by many to be the Japanese version of Frank Shamrock, it's a situation that's almost a no-win for the Japanese fighter. There may be some special rules involved, including the idea of longer rounds, 15 minutes as opposed to the usual 10 minutes. Otsuka, who weighs about 205, a Battle Arts pro wrestler who made a name for himself in this world when he outlasted and exhausted Marco Ruiz, is facing a 185-pounder who is unbeaten under MMA rules. Coleman vs. Moraes would be a classic match for the United States because they are two huge physiques, but would have less marketability in Japan. Coleman, a 245-pound powerhouse wrestler who looked unbeatable in his early UFC matches before opponents learned to take advantage of his stamina problems, which caused him 3 straight losses, faces an imposing-looking 6'8", 270-pound Brazilian monster whose only MMA loss was to wrestler Grom Zaza of Rings, where he was taken down and basically unable to escape from the bottom against a world-class wrestler. Moraes will be taken down, but is very tough mentally in regards to not quitting. He had his ankle broken in a match with Trey Teligman earlier this year, failed to tap out and came back to win, and has come from behind several times, while Coleman has never won a match that went more than 11 minutes but never lost a match for any reason other than getting tired first. Goes is a highly regarded jiu-jitsu star with a Brazilian background who gave Sakuraba his toughest test to date in the Pride Rings, a slow-moving 30 minutes match which saw Goes use a lot of stalling tactics to frustrate his Japanese foe, and faces a Battle Arts pro wrestler who is one of the most underrated exciting workers in the business, but as a shooter, has won and lost rather boring time limit decisions on the 2 most recent Pride shows. Matsui, who started as a pro wrestler under Takada, is a decent prelim fighter but would be a heavy underdog against Silva. The news was mainly encouraging this past week when it comes to the long-term prognosis of Darren Drozdov, who suffered a fractured neck and temporary paralysis after being injured taking a running Liger bomb spot in a match at the Nassau Coliseum against D'Lo Brown. The 30-year-old Drozdov was moved early last week to a hospital closer to his home and beginning physical therapy. As the week went by, he was getting more upper body movement and getting what was called beginning sensory feeling in his lower extremities, which was considered a very good sign, and he's said to be very optimistic in talking about eventually returning to wrestling. The doctors are said to be cautiously optimistic he'll regain feeling in his legs. The negative is his inactivity led to him suffer pneumonia and fluid in his lungs. It has not been ruled out completely that he could return to wrestling, although even the most optimistic estimate would be that such a return would be a long ways away. It will be a long process in regaining lost motor skills, and that is all dependent upon regaining lower body movement. The 5.36 to 3.30 win for Raw on October 18 followed the most one-sided rating in history on October 11, while ECW finally showed genuine signs of upward mobility, doing its biggest rating to date. Raw finished with a 6.09 rating, 5.94 first hour, 6.01 seconds hour, and 9.0 share, while Nitro did a record low 2.63 rating, 3.69 first hour, 2.18 seconds hour, 2.09 third hour, and a 3.9 share. Over the head-to-head 2 hours and 7 minutes, it was 6.09 for Raw and 2.14 for Nitro. In the main event battle, Raw with Mankind and Rock vs. Bulldog and Venus did a 6.19 final quarter and a 6.02 overrun. Nitro with Hart and Benoit vs. Luger and Steiner did a 2.30 rating. The Monday Night Football game with the Jacksonville Jaguars vs. New York Jets did the second lowest rating in the 30-year history of the show, a 10.38, probably again more due to the baseball playoff game on Fox than wrestling, because the combined head-to-head wrestling audience of an 8.23 rating was the lowest in more than a year. In the head-to-head battle on October 14th, UPN SmackDown did its best rating to date with a 4.63 headlined by Outlaws vs. Rock and Mankind. Undergoing head-to-head headlined by Bagwell and Parka vs. Luger and Steiner did its all-time record low in its regular time slot of a 1.79 rating, which tells you why the show is about to move days. The remainder of the October 15th to 16th weekend numbers saw Livewire at 1.5, Superstars at 1.8, Sunday Night Heat at 3.57, and WCW Saturday Night at 1.4. The October 15th ECW on TNN grew to a 1.16 rating and 2.1 share, breaking its old record by 20%. There is little question the answer to the question as to why is women in bikinis, just as it works on WWF broadcasts. Even though the October 8th show was the worst show in the company's short history on the network, it featured Tammy Sitch, in lots of bikini shots, and who had WWF star power. To show it was curiosity, or whatever, from the previous week, generally ECW opens with 0.6 to 0.8 quarters and grows throughout the show, and this week it opened to nearly double that average with a 1.21 first quarter, and fell slightly from there. The 2-hour Roller Jam only did an 0.57 rating. For the October 8th to 9th weekend, the numbers were Livewire at 1.7, Superstars at 1.9, Sunday Night Heat at 3.42, and WCW Saturday Night again tied its all-time 30-year record low with a 1.3. Mankind's appearance after Heat heavily pushed on G vs. E was not the success that previous wrestlers' appearances have been, having some G and E previously appearances by Triple H and Sable on Pac Blue, immediately after Heat, led to the show doing record numbers and maintaining virtually all of the wrestling audience. This season, with Shawn Michaels on Pac Blue, there was none of that residual effect as the show drew basically its season average. The Evil was the first airing fell from the 3.4 of Heat to a 1.4, which is basically about average of what the show had been doing, and clearly this was a last-ditch effort to save the show in the slot, as after the rating came in, they moved Pac Blue back to the spot after Heat. The good was the rerun after Raw did a 1.6 rating, which is good, but not overwhelming for the slot past highly rated Raw. For October 7th, SmackDown's 4.4 rating ranked number 87 in prime time, still the highest rating for UPN, losing to everything network-wise except WB. 10 largest crowds in U.S. pro wrestling history. 78,000, March 29, 1987, Pontiac Silverdome. Hogan vs. Andre, 62,167, April 5, 1992, Indianapolis Hoosier Dome. Hogan vs. Sid, 60,525, January 21, 1997, San Antonio Alamo Dome. Michaels vs. Sid, 41,412, July 6, 1998, Atlanta Georgia Dome. Hogan vs. Goldberg, 40,000, July 30, 1935, Boston Fenway Park. Dano O'Mahony vs. Ed Don George, 38,809, January 4, 1999, Atlanta Georgia Dome. Nitro, 38,756, October 10, 1934, Los Angeles Rose Bowl. Jim Londos vs. Man Mountain Dean, 38,622, June 20, 1961, Chicago Comiskey Park. Pat O'Connor vs. Buddy Rogers, 36,295, August 9, 1980 New York Shea Stadium, Bruno Sammartino vs. Larry Zbyszko 35,732. October 11, 1999 Atlanta, Georgia Dome, Raw. Notes: the Indianapolis and San Antonio shows were both heavily papered. The paid attendance in San Antonio was 48,014 and the paid attendance in Indianapolis was 47,000. The Fenway Park and Rose Bowl crowds in the 1930s are unverifiable and could very well be exaggerated figures. There are newspaper and book records from the time indicating those figures, but it needs to be noted that in those days, like today, newspaper accounts can't be taken as necessarily accurate. Even the 1961 Chicago Comiskey Park crowd could have been a slightly exaggerated number, although based on the gate it probably wasn't by much if at all. The modern crowds, from 1980 on, are verified figures and are not inflated. The next three on the list would be a 1934 Jim Londos vs. Stranger Lewis match from Chicago's Wrigley Field, 35,265, which is again unverifiable because of when it took place but is more verifiable than any figure from that time because there are box office breakdowns from the show. A 1932 Madison Square Garden Bowl match with Strangler Lewis vs. Dick Chicot, 35,000, where the figure is unverifiable. The figure was from an AP newspaper report at the time, but I've actually seen a tape of the match itself. There were a ton of fans at the show. And a 1984 Texas Stadium match with Ric Flair vs. Kerry Von Erich, 32,123, which is a real number. Japanese television rundown. October 2, New Japan. 1. Satoshi Kojima and Hiroyoshi Tenzan beat Genichiro Tenryu and Tadao Yasuda in 11:46. Finish saw Kojima and Tenzan do what amounts to a 3D on Tenryu, and Kojima made Yasuda submit to Kojima Max, which is a kneeling armbar. 2.5 stars. 2. Tatsutoshi Goto and Michiyoshi Ohara beat Shiro Koshinaka and Junji Hirata in a match as part of the G1 Tag Team Tournament in 12:06. Kept moving but wasn't very good, particularly Goto and Hirata were bad, and lacked heat. Goto used his back suplex twice on Koshinaka, but he kicked out of both, as well as kicking out of a double-team powerbomb. Ohara destroyed Hirata outside the ring. In the ring, Goto used 2 low blows and a left-armed lariat to pin Koshinaka. Goto also gave ref Masao Hattori a lariat after the match. 1.25 stars. 3. Yuji Nagata and Manabu Nakanishi beat Kensuke Sasaki and Kazuyuki Fujita in another tag team tournament match in 14:29. About half the match aired on television. They did submissions early. Fujita, who is a very athletic short powerhouse but still really green, did the worst Frankensteiner. It couldn't even remotely be called that move, it missed so badly, ever. The match picked up with Sasaki in. As goofy as Nakanishi is, he's still worlds better than Lex Luger. Fujita tried the Frankensteiner a second time and did a perfect one, showing his great springs and his legs. Fujita got near falls on Nagata with a jackhammer and a fisherman buster, followed by a spear. Nagata finally pinned Fujita with a bridging back suplex. 2.25 stars. 4. Keiji Muto and Scott Norton beat Shinya Hashimoto and Meng in 17:30. Again, about half the match aired. The match wasn't bad since it was mostly Muto versus Hashimoto, with Norton and Meng just tagging in for quick spots. They both were really bad. Norton's right knee was out, so he wasn't mobile, and his offense consisted mainly of stomps, and with a bad knee, they looked bad. Finish saw Muto pin Meng after a Frankensteiner, but it was a slow-mo version and there was a problem in it where Muto nearly landed on his head trying to flip Meng over. 2 stars. 5. Kendo Kashin retained the IWGP Junior Heavyweight title, beating Tatsuhito Takaiwa in 15:08. About half the match aired. Takaiwa power-bombed Kashin on the floor early, but in the ring they traded sleepers with not much heat. Takaiwa did his triple bomb into a sleeper, followed by his killer lariat for a near fall and a cross-arm German suplex. Kashin did a nice spot where Takaiwa set up a Death Valley driver off the middle ropes and he turned it into a straight armbar on the mat. Kashin went for his trademark flying armbar, but Takaiwa blocked it, and Kashin switched to a triangle. Takaiwa tried to break it with a one-arm power bomb, but Kashin held on the first time and Takaiwa did the move a second time for the break. Takaiwa then went for a Death Valley driver, but Kashin maneuvered it into an armbar for the submission. This was a pretty good technical match, maybe a disappointment by the standards of an IWGP Junior title match, and definitely disappointing from the heat standpoint. After the match, Kashin, who came out with his own Kashin title belt along with the IWGP Junior belt, put his own belt on and threw the existing belt on the ground, stepped on it and walked off without it. 3.25 stars. October 3rd, All Japan. There was no new material taped for this show, so they aired interviews with the various top guys, Misawa, Kobashi, Akiyama and Takayama and Omori, and showed various short clips of their matches mainly designed to build up the October 30th Misawa vs. Vader Triple Crown match, the October 23rd tag title match with Misawa and Ogawa vs. Kobashi and Akiyama, and the October 30th Kobashi and Akiyama vs. Takayama and Omori matches. Mexico. Felino quit AAA and has returned to EMLL. Ovaciones reported Felino left is because Antonio Pena told him he'd only push Felino to the top of the card if Felino sold the rights to his name and his gimmick to Pena, who created it in the first place in 1989 as EMLL Booker. Felino refused and Pena told him he could stay but he wouldn't give him any kind of a push, so he quit. There is talk, but the decision hasn't been confirmed, of Galavision moving the EMLL TV show in the United States from Saturdays to Sundays. For losing its connection to foreign talent due to the falling out with Victor Quiñones, it puts the EMLL 6th Annual International Grand Prix Tournament, which was going to be headlined by using such guys as Steele, Valvinus, and Gigante Silva, in jeopardy. Originally it was going to take place this month and now it hasn't been talked about. Astro Rey Jr. retained the Mexican national welterweight title beating Valentin Mayo in 21 minutes in the main event of the October 12th Arena Coliseo show in what the papers called a fair match. They debuted a wrestler under the name Johnny Boyd, who as best I know the original, who just passed away a few weeks back, never wrestled in Mexico, in the opener. The new Infernales, El Satanico and Ultimo Guerrero and Rey Bucanero won't be teaming in November since Guerrero will be in Japan from November 20th to December 1st and Bucanero and Satanico are headed on a wrestling tour of Switzerland from November 1st to November 11th. The October 15th Arena Mexico show was headlined by Shocker NCN Caras and Scorpio Jr. beating T. Nieblas Jr. and Mr. Niebla and Rayo de Jalisco Jr. when Shocker pinned Rayo after a low blow in the third fall. The semi saw Emilio Charles Jr. and Tarzan Boy and Brazo de Plata beat Apollo Dantes and Universo 2000 and Mascara Ano 2000 via DQ when Dantes was DQ'd for using a low blow on Porky. The October 22nd show is headlined by a three-way trios match with Brazo de Plata and Tarzan Boy and Charles Jr., Dantes and Universo and Mascara 2000 and Pierroth Jr. and Villano Tercero and Fuerza Guerrera. On the October 29th Arena Mexico show, which would be the 20th anniversary of his pro debut in 1979, Negro Casas will wrestle 4 singles matches on one show. 3 of his opponents will be longtime former tag team partner Blue Panther, his brother Felino and Fuerza Guerrera. Antonio Pena is doing his own NWO angle with a mythical Colombian-based company called LLL rating his talent, which continues to wrestle in his own company as heels. Those who have jumped to LLL include the Vipers Extreme, Los Brujas, Xochitl Hamada and Miss Janeth and Rossi Moreno, and Los Mini Vipers, Mini Psicosis and Mini Hysteria and Mini Mosco de la Merced. El Alabrije has been wearing the old UWA Junior heavyweight title belt on the AAA television show. Arrow Flash was the last champion and we don't have any record of an actual title switch taking place. Rayo de Jalisco Jr. retained the CMLL heavyweight title beating Mascara Ano 2000 before 3,000 fans on October 17th at Arena Coliseo. Somos Magazine, equivalent to A&E Biography Magazine, did its entire October 99 issue on El Santo. The much talked about El Hijo del Santo vs. Fishman Mask vs. Mask match never took place as Fishman cancelled, apparently getting cold feet about losing his mask. He's done that many times over the past several years, getting jobs with various promoters by promising to give up his mask at the end of the run since he's retiring soon, but then backs out right before the big match. Fishman is getting heavily ripped in the press for this one. All Japan. The current tour may be the worst drawing tour in the recent history of the promotion and privately Mitsuharu Misawa is getting heavily criticized when it comes to booking. It should pick up with the 3 big matches on the tour, the October 23rd tag title match with Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa defending against Kenta Kobashi and Jun Akiyama, the All-Asian Tag Team title finals on October 25th. The tournament has meant nothing at the box office, although nobody expected it would. It was just something to spice up undercards. The belief is that Masao Inoue and Tamon Honda will wind up beating Masahito Kakihara and Daisuke Ikeda in the finals, and the October 30th Triple Crown match where Vader comes in for one night as Misawa's opponent. New Japan. If Shinya Hashimoto's career hadn't hit the skids badly enough in 1999, it was announced that due to injuries suffered at the Dome show that he's missing the current Fall in Black 1999 tour, which opened on October 15th in Chiryu before 2,800 fans. Another part of the major problems with New Japan regular touring shows in the future are that of the three big regular draws the company has built around for years. Masahiro Chono is physically destroyed due to back and neck problems. Keiji Muto's knees are shot and he's on the last leg, surviving mainly on guile, and Hashimoto's credibility was destroyed this year. The press conference was largely an angle as it was felt to sell the beating from the Dome show as legit, and keep the feud between the two as legit, that Hashimoto, who took the beating, had to take some time off. The current plan is for him to miss the rest of the year and return for the January 4th Dome show. Legitimately, this was the second smallest Tokyo Dome crowd in New Japan history, and there may have been slightly less than 50,000 in the building as the entire outfield was empty. In addition, scalpers were almost giving away tickets in front of the building. Usually most good seats at New Japan shows go to scalpers, who unload them in front of the arena for a huge profit. The reason many times crowds are late arriving is that scalpers will sell the unused tickets as the show goes on. For this show, we're told a lot of the $300, most expensive tickets, usually they have about 6,000 on the field for the Dome shows, weren't sold until as late as intermission, at which point scalpers were unloading them as low as $20. In the past they usually go for well above the listed price. After the match, Inoki and Hashimoto cried in the ring together. The two had been at odds for most of the past year due to what happened in the first match, but Inoki took Hashimoto out to dinner and worked his magic on him. Inoki has the similar magic as Hogan and McMahon in that people hate them for often very good reasons, but once they are around their presence, they can be manipulated into doing exactly what the person wants anyway. There is no actual significant injury. Chono claimed that his neck was fine and he'd be wrestling every night of the tour. They did an angle on the first night with Team 2000, Chono's group, attempting to recruit New Japan's biggest wrestler, Tadao Yasuda, away. In the tag match, Chono and NWO Sting beat Yasuda and Manabu Nakanishi. After the match, Chono, Sting and Michael Wallstreet covered Yasuda with a black towel and took him to their dressing room. Chono said that either he'd make Team 2000 stronger than ever on this tour or break up the team. Also, they are doing a storyline where Keiji Muto is trying to recruit New Japan's best young wrestler, Yuji Nagata. At this point, no team members have changed. Then on October 17th in Kobe, they teased perhaps Muto and Chono's NWO and Team 2000 joining together. After Muto and Satoshi Kojima beat Shiro Koshinaka and Nagata, Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Hiro Saito, Muto's team members, joined in beating up on Koshinaka and Nagata after the match when Team 2000 came in, but they also attacked Koshinaka and Nagata. In the main event, Manabu Nakanishi and Kensuke Sasaki beat NWO Sting and Chono, and after the match, Muto and the rest of NWO Japan made the save for Chono. Muto and Chono then eyed each other in the ring but kept it a mystery what they were doing next. The plan seems to be to finish up using the NWO name on this tour, which would make the company have even less reason to maintain business with WCW. The belief is that when Tatsumi Fujinami came to the US he never even had a serious meeting with WCW, and Keiji Muto will be coming to the US after this tour to keep the relationship from falling apart. New Japan has seriously discussed a Naoya Ogawa vs Kazuyuki Fujita match at the January 4th Dome show to elevate Fujita into the new rising superstar position, where as long as he gets some serious offense in, he can lose this match and rise. Fujita is a short powerhouse who is a former national champion amateur who looks good in shoot-style matches against the likes of Don Frye but is green at traditional style. They are also considering Bill Goldberg vs Kenzo Suzuki, who they have big plans for, with a similar storyline. If Goldberg doesn't come, they'll probably debut Suzuki against Hiroyoshi Tenzan, and there is some talk of doing another Muto vs Chono singles match since it's been so long since it's been done, although it's been done a million times, along with Akimo vs Yuji Nagata possible rematch. Chris Benoit's first match back with New Japan, where he uses the name Wild Pegasus and where he was trained 12 years ago, in 4 years, since his loss to Shinjiro Otani to create the first WCW Cruiserweight champ, was on the October 15th show, teaming with Dean Malenko and Dr. Wagner Jr., beating Jushin Liger and Kendo Kashin and El Samurai when he pinned Samurai after the diving headbutt. Then on October 17th at Kobe World Memorial Hall before 6,000 fans, Malenko beat Koji Kanemoto in 12:41 with the Texas Cloverleaf, and Pegasus pinned IWGP Junior champ Liger in a non-title match with a Dragon Suplex, which theoretically should build the two up for a title match, to reprise their feud which had numerous tremendous matches over the years. On October 16th in Yokkaichi, Benoit and Malenko and Wagner lost to Otani and Kanemoto and Tatsuhito Takaiwa when Otani pinned Wagner. The matches have all been said to be very good, with the Liger vs Benoit match getting the most notice. Atsushi Onita was scheduled to do an angle on the October 19th show in Fukuoka, but it fell through. Actually, Onita was working his own angle, saying he'd be there without checking with the office. The office nixed it since it wasn't their idea, and Onita was forced to make up a story publicly about a family emergency not allowing him to attend the show. Onita did an angle going to the office when Riki Choshu and Tatsumi Fujinami weren't there, congratulating the company for a good Tokyo Dome show on October 11th. The show was very well received publicly, and then made note that the crowd was one of the lowest ever for a New Japan Dome show, saying that if he was on the card, it would have sold out. This is basically to build for Onita appearing on the January 4th Dome show, probably in a tag match with Tenryu against Choshu and Fujinami, but that deal isn't finalized, and New Japan is trying to position to Onita that they don't need him, so he'll come in making less demands. Kazunari Murakami of UFO, while wrestling on the combined Michinoku/Battle Arts show on October 17th, challenged Takashi Iizuka on the same Tokyo Dome show. The North Korea show, originally scheduled for November 17th, was moved until April, blaming the weather, which makes no sense as it pertains to an indoor show. Most in Japan feel Antonio Inoki is just publicly posturing and there may not even be a show, so they had to come up with a story now since November is only 1 month away. Inoki returned from Korea and said that he failed to reach an agreement to bring either Michael Jackson or Jesse Ventura in. Inoki said that there would be a UFO show in Amsterdam, Holland on November 28th, headlined by Naoya Ogawa, and that he was looking at getting UFO televised in the United States. Inoki is still convinced he can get over the NWA title in Japan to mean what it once did in the 70s. With WWF popular on TV in Japan now, they asked Inoki about it and he praised the show but said that style of promotion would never work long-term in Japan. A lot of the smaller companies are going to a more WWF storyline-oriented soap opera as opposed to the traditional athletically based Japanese product, because Japanese people like serious wrestling. Inoki doesn't like Onita around because he doesn't take him as a serious wrestler, and everyone in the company recognizes Onita's New Japan matches have all been horrible, but they also recognize that his shows built around only him still sell out Korakuen Hall and he's worth several thousand tickets at a Dome show. Kimo came out at the Dome show carrying the cross on his back like he did in his original UFC appearance in 1994. They are hoping to make him into a big foreign star, limiting him to no bouncing off the ropes to make him legit and concentrating on takedowns, the mount, punching from the mount and chokes to make it look believable. With his colorful appearance and ring entrance he came off looking like a big star. He signed a contract with New Japan to work as a regular pro wrestler. Other Japan notes. Ultimo Dragon, Yoshihiro Asai, scheduled a press conference on October 20th to address his future, which presumably would be his announcement of his official retirement from wrestling due to his elbow injury. Rings officially announced the bracketing for the 16 fighters that will be in the first of the 2 tournaments leading up to the Final 8 tournament in February. The first tournament, which presumably is going to be an all-shoot tournament, which would make it one of the few, like you can count them on 2 fingers, true shoot tournament in pro wrestling in modern times, takes place October 28th at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym 2 with first and second round matches and bracketing in this order. Jeremy Horn, UFC fighter, versus Hiromitsu Kaneara, Gajaje Bakuri versus Dan Henderson, former U.S. Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler, Labaznov Armed, Russia, versus Lee Hasdell, rings regular from England, Renato Babalu, Brazil, versus Graham Zaza, rings regular who is a former Olympic wrestler, Yuri Korchikin, Russia, versus Gilbert Yvel, Holland, Antonio Nogueira, Brazil, versus Valentin Novarim, Holland, Justin McCulley, UFO/Los Angeles, versus Eliakim Mikhail and Yoshihisa Yamamoto versus Brad Kohler, from the last UFC and a pro wrestler from Minnesota. Of those I'm familiar with, which is most but not all of them, all in the 200 to 220 pound weight category except Horn, who has fought at 199 this year but was 229 at his UFC fight last month, Kohler, who was 234 on the same show, and Zaza, who is a 242 pound former Olympic Games wrestler. From a business perspective and from a name value and drawing card standpoint, there's nothing there. 2 rings regulars, Wataru Sakata and Hasdell, were winners on a caged fighting show in Milton Keynes, England on October 3rd, which was probably promoted by Hasdell as a rings show. The combined Michinoku and Battle Arts show on October 17th in Yokohama drew a reported 3,403 fans. In the main, Jinsei Shinzaki and Alexander Otsuka, who both went to the same high school, Toko High School in Tokushima, they didn't attend at the same time as Shinzaki is several years older than Otsuka, but there is a connection since Shinzaki was the star that popularized wrestling at the school and in a large part led to Otsuka's first wrestling training, who were voted in by the fans as opponents, beat the combination of Michinoku Pro and Battle Arts presidents Great Sasuke and Yuki Ishikawa in 25-27 when Otsuka pinned Sasuke after a double-team German suplex. Naoki Sano retained his independent World Junior title beating Curry Man, Christopher Daniels, with a backdrop driver. Sano challenged Jushin Liger to unify the belts after the match. Kazushi Sakuraba, a former pro wrestler who was generally ranked alongside Frank Shamrock as the best under 200-pound fighter in the world, was in Sano's corner for the match. TNT Savio Vega in WWF returned to Japan, and this may have been his first match back in about a year since suffering a bad neck injury beating Daisuke Ikeda. CMLL Japan will be running a short tour opening November 21st in Kyoto and finishing November 25th at Korakuen Hall called Rudos del Milenio 1999 featuring Negro Casas, El Satanico, Super Parka, Ricky Marvin, Tortuga, Okonomi Man, Enigma, Pirata Morgan, Ultimo Guerrero, Virus, Sangre Azteca, Super Cacao, Snowman, Max Bunny, M. Dick Togo, Daisuke Ikeda and Masato Yakashiji. FMW announced in the Koto Fuyuki vs. Masato Tanaka loser leaves town match on November 23 at Yokohama Arena. There would be a 2-ton cage with 13,000 volts of electricity, making it the most dangerous electrified dynamite match ever. Osaka Pro Wrestling announced that K1 fighter Takahiro Murahama will have a mixed match against their wrestler Naohiro Hoshikawa on January 4 at the Namihaya Dome in Osaka. Katsumata Sakamoto, a famous television actor, is said to be wanting to join the Seikendo promotion. Seikendo ran a show at Tokyo Ariake Coliseum 2 weeks ago with mainly Russian fighters, which got minimal coverage in either the pro wrestling or martial arts world. It drew about 4,000 fans, which isn't bad, except that one report has the paid attendance at only a few hundred, which is. Promoter Satoru Sayama, who has Kurt Angle's scheduled Japanese debut on November 5 in Yokohama, talked of an Angle vs. Alexander Karelin match. Sayama has been wanting to bring in Karelin, who drew Ring's biggest house in history, a nearly $2.5 million live gate, and by far its most mainstream press coverage in history for his pro wrestling debut against Akira Maeda in February, and a brief mention in Sports Illustrated for some time. Karelin said after his Rings match that he wasn't interested in doing anything but training in Greco-Roman wrestling until after the 2000 Olympics, when he goes for his record-setting, for wrestling 4th gold medal and 13th world championship. Seikendo ran a show in Monbetsu on October 16 featuring 5 boxing matches and 3 pro wrestling matches headlined by Sayama over Ikuto Hidaka. Sayama had his own Vader work the show, forming a tag team with former Rings and K1 competitor Mitsuya Nagai. FMW is considering a storyline for the November 23 show where owner Arai will turn heel, where have we seen this before, and cost Masato Tanaka the loser leaves town match with Koto Fuyuki. FMW behind Fuyuki has become the most Americanized promotion with more interviews, angles, turns and run-in finishes. It has its core of fans who love the style, but they don't number a lot as their live shows usually draw about 400 despite what is publicly announced. On October 18 in Chiba, original Hayabusa threw a fireball at fake Hayabusa. The two are scheduled for a match on October 29 at Korakuen Hall, where the loser has a stick of dynamite shoved up their ass. I'm not making this up. Although they still run occasional shows under the banner, for all real purposes the Neo Ladies office has closed. The office itself is no longer operational, but Kyoko Inoue is running shows on her own, including monthly cards at Club Chita in Kawasaki, Korakuen Hall and a few other buildings under the Neo Ladies name. IWA Japan is running October 24th show in Ariake headlined by Tiger Jeet Singh vs. Mr. Pogo in a street fight plus a electrified barbed wire board match with Leatherface, Rick Patterson, and Doug Gilbert, and Yoshia Yamashita vs. Tarzan Goto and Ichiro Yaguchi and a mystery partner. Onita and Tenryu will form their tag team for the first time on the November 12th Onita Korakuen Hall show. On Big Japan's October 17th show at Korakuen Hall, they had a one-night arm wrestling tournament among the Cruise wrestlers won by Mitsuhiro Matsunaga, and Shadow WX retained his deathmatch title beating Tomoaki Honma. Kato Kung Lee Jr. from Mexico is on tour with this group. Here and there. ABC's 2020 is doing a 9-minute segment on pro wrestling schools. Hopefully not the same story that's been beaten to death, covering among other places the Power Plant and Leigh Thatcher School, scheduled for either October 28 or November 4 air date. This week's Sports Illustrated Pro Wrestling References saw them do a scorecard item on the WWF IPO. There wasn't even a story written, they just quoted directly from the IPO with the headline word for word as to what the WWF was, along with a photo of Austin. I think the idea is that think admissions about creative teams and soap opera storylines and good versus evil situations. Hey Vince, I thought good versus evil was passé. Makes fun of what pro wrestling is rather than it's simply what it is, and its fans pretty well accept that. It's no longer a great media revelation that pro wrestling is scripted. The second was a lengthy story about the world's strongest men contest that air on ESPN2 at all hours of the day. They make comparisons in the story to pro wrestling, circus-like atmosphere, although note the competitions are not fake nor predetermined. They refer a lot to Bill Kazmaier, who had a brief wrestling career working a little in Alabama, where's he's from, later in Calgary for Stu Hart, where he had what was actually a legendary, as in bad, feud with former bench press world record holder Ted Arcidi, and later was, for reasons nobody at the time could understand or still understand, a main eventer for WCW chasing Lex Luger's WCW world title in late 1991 with some dud matches before sparse crowds. Kaz, who is considered by many in the field of strength training to be in his prime, the strongest man who ever walked the face of the earth, was a terrible pro wrestler, with his almost complete lack of charisma and limited interview ability being surpassed only by an even greater lack of ability inside the ring. He still beat Kevin Nash, wrestling under the name Oz, on that year's Halloween Havoc, only to get this match teamed with Jushin Liger, who at the time was probably the greatest in-ring performer in the business, to beat DDP, when the name DDP didn't mean much in wrestling, and Mike Graham at that year's Starrcade. Can you imagine there was actually a booker who put that match on a Starrcade, and Kaz and Liger as a tag team was a laughingstock at the time? I guess this historical remembrance brings back that WCW was even more a laughingstock 8 years ago than it was this year. Anyway, Kaz, now 45, does color commentary on the broadcasts. He was a 3-time world champion, 1980 to 1982, in the events. It's generally considered that virtually all WSM competitors use steroids, with one competitor estimating 1% didn't, but then Kaz was quoted in the story as saying he thinks it's closer to 50% who haven't. Kaz did admit to using steroids himself, although he preaches to children against them now. There was a photo of Kaz in the story. He looks far older than 45, although his arms are still immense, and he looks like just about the most powerful middle-aged man who ever walked the earth. He's also talking about making a comeback, thankfully in strongman competitors, not pro wrestling. Matt Osborne tested positive for cocaine while trying to get a wrestling license in Rhode Island, which may result in a revocation of his parole on a disorderly conduct conviction in Pennsylvania. Osborne was arrested and placed in jail without bail pending a hearing. Danny Hodge was named chairman of the newly formed Oklahoma Pro Wrestling and Boxing Commission. There are currently no guidelines designed for pro wrestling, but they are being formulated. The state had regulated boxing, but not pro wrestling previously, regulating boxing under the guise of the Labor Department. The new commission is being under the guise of the Health Department. The New York Times had reporters and photographers at the October 1st EMLL show at Arena Mexico working on a major piece about Lucha Libre. You know what's interesting, is that numerous major publications have written their Lucha Libre story about El Santo and all that, but virtually nobody ever does a Japanese wrestling story, even though in many ways wrestling is bigger in Japan than Mexico. At some points it isn't, and at other points it is. Memphis Power Pro on October 16th saw Brian Christopher come in with a van filled with his own fans. They had a section of the bleachers reserved for his fan club who chanted for him. He claimed his fans were from the affluent sections of Memphis. He then presented a clock with his photo on it to his fan of the year. Doug Gilbert came out and bashed the clock on Christopher's head. They aired a vignette of Romeo Valentine, who is coming in doing a guy gimmick. Derek King is back as the Young Guns champ, having beaten Robbie D last week at the New Daisy Theater. They started to tease an angle with Jim Cornette's men as PPW champ Steve Bradley talked about being unbeatable and Mike Tierney got mad at him. As it turned out later in the show, in a 6-man tag, Tierney and Bradley and Glenn Kulka were facing jobbers Alan Steele and Bulldog Reigns, whose partner Blade had been jumped earlier in the show by Lance Jade. Ali Stevens, the guy who resembles Ahmed Johnson, ran into team with the jobbers and scored a clean pin on Bradley. On the Memphis show, they talked about Jeff Jarrett going to WCW. TV main with Christopher versus Gilbert ended up as a no contest when Spellbinder, dressed up in a disguise, pushed Gilbert off the top rope and hit him with a bottle, and he and Christopher were hanging him until Tommy Rich made the save. Dennis Corraluzzo has been cut off from using any more WWF talent. Actually, they had technically cut him off some time back, but he was getting talent through Joe Panzerino. The fallout had to do with the Gilbert show. Apparently they felt they were told they'd be able to use DROZ, Prince Albert and the Mean Street Posse on the show and were advertising them, but WWF felt they were never given the okay and were mad they were being advertised and refused to allow them to appear, and some story was created in the building about a previous commitment. Got an interesting letter in the mail this past week. Basically, the people working on the movie Demon of the Derby, the Ann Calvello story, are attempting to raise $15,000 to finish the film, and to do so they are selling the film credits. Don't know how common this is in movies. I'd tend to believe this isn't exactly the first time something like this has been done. For example, for a $1,000 donation you can be listed as the casting director. For a $500 donation you can be the stunt coordinator or costume designer, and for a $100 donation you get head makeup or be listed as a stuntman, and for a $50,000 donation you can be the executive producer of the movie. There was an item in Kansas City about the pro wrestling store at the Great Plains Mall closing. When the owner was asked, with wrestling being so popular, how come the store closed, he said that wrestlers were switching from good to bad back to good too fast. Good guy wrestlers would have t-shirts made and then they'd switch and nobody would buy the shirts and the stores would be left with unused inventory. I know at the local mall all the pro wrestling t-shirts. Even Austin Rock and Goldbergs have been selling for $5, although that was the case on and off all year, and you can get DDP shirts for $3. Name from the past on the October 15th All-Star Wrestling show in Bristol, England, Pat Roach, who has to be in his late 50s by now. Roach was a big British star already by the early 70s and worked in California at that time, as well as Lord Patrick Roach, and later became a television star in England. For those interested, on the October 16th show in Greensboro, 62-year-old Jimmy Valiant pinned former WCW television announcer Chris Cruz. Jon Stewart, who wrestles for the AWA as Johnny Stewart, will be running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Illinois' 10th District in the 2000 election. Stewart had previously failed in 1998 in a bid for the 11th District for the Illinois State House. Stewart will either run as either a Republican or a Reform Party candidate. MMA. Saw the tape of the October 3rd K1 show. Not a lot notable about the show. Mike Bernardo appeared to have gone into his match with Milko Filipovic injured, because he didn't look in his usual shape, and when he came into the ring, had that "I'm doing a job" look all over his face. This is not saying the match was fixed, just his face showed no confidence, which I presume was because he wasn't in his best shape, and he got knocked down with a kick immediately that turned his legs into spaghetti, and he didn't even last the first round. Actually, the most impressive of all the first round winners looked to be Jerome La Banner. Frank Shamrock started back in training this week, and he is scheduled to fight on the November 14th UFC Japan pay-per-view show, although even though it's less than a month away, he doesn't know his opponent. ECW. At this point, the November 7th pay-per-view lineup is Awesome vs. Tanaka for the ECW title, Van Dam vs. Taz for the ECW TV title, Storm and Credible vs. Raven and Dreamer for the tag titles, Lynn vs. Tajiri vs. Super Crazy, Sabu vs. Candido, Axel Rotten and Balls Mahoney and New Jack vs. Vito Lograsso and Spanish Angel and Tony DeVito, plus a singles match with Rhino and a tag match with Danny During and Roadkill. Paul Heyman said that the Anarchy Rules pay-per-view show, which was the company's first pay-per-view available in Canada, did about 85,000 buys overall, which would wind up an 0.23 buy rate. Taz will be working the TV tapings in Poughkeepsie and Dayton. The TNN show was again largely built around whatever mainstream star power is left in Tammy Sytch. They did an opening very short angle where Sytch and Dawn Marie went at it after Lance Storm cut a promo on her being washed up, which was way too close to the truth because she looked it, and next to Dawn Marie, that only made it worse. People still popped for her entrance. David Cash vs. Tom Marquez lasted a few seconds before Rhino, wearing an Atlanta Falcons jersey, they were in Houma, Louisiana, which is New Orleans Saints country, came out and speared both guys. Steve Corino, also wearing a Falcons jersey, then challenged two members of the Saints, Josh Wilcox and Kyle Turley, who were plants in the front row. Wilcox, originally from Portland, Oregon, is a pro wrestler from that part of the country in between stints in various pro football leagues after gaining local acclaim as a college football star. Rhino went to fight both, but it was mainly a pull-apart with he and Wilcox knew what to do to make it work better than your classic celeb who laughs through the angle. Dreamer then came out under the guise he was basically Office breaking up a bad scene caused by one of his wrestlers. Dreamer and Corino then started a brawl which went into the stands. Dreamer pulled Corino's pants down and gave him a chair shot to his bare ass. Corino wrestled for about a minute with his butt showing, but it was digitized on camera, causing Joel Gertner to talk about how he's wearing 27 digital squares on his butt. Dreamer did a superplex, but overall couldn't do much. Corino hit the ref. Jack Victory tried to interfere but had to sell the lamest roundhouse kick by the incredibly shrinking woman, Francine. Yoshihiro Tajiri ran in to give her a German suplex but she low-blowed him, and then when he recovered, she ran from him. Raven ran in and looked like he was saving Dreamer, who delivered DDTs on Victory and Tajiri, before Raven DDT'd Dreamer. Dreamer cradled Corino anyway for the pin. Match was so-so and the story of the finish was done okay. Storm beat Condito in an average match in 6:31. Condito used a plancha to the floor and a top rope superplex. It was mainly a build-up for the cat fight spot. In the melee, Justin Credible hit Condito with a cane and Storm pinned him after a cradle piledriver. Finally, Mike Awesome beat Rod Price in an ECW title match. Awesome's brawling at the beginning looked bad. He didn't come across as either a big powerhouse or a champion in this match. He power-bombed Price in the ring, then power-bombed Price's manager, the Ragin' Cajun over the top rope through a table, and of course the table spots got over. Then pinned Price in 3:23 after a slash off the top. The show ended with a Pulp Fiction interview montage, which included Corino running down Jerry Lynn during an interview and Lynn eventually looking for him, finding him but being attacked by Tajiri. Raven, who was the focal point of the segment, outshined everyone else on the piece. Just in case anyone thought Jim Hellwig may not have totally lost his mind, he responded to Paul Heyman's suggestion from months ago that he'd be interested in using Hellwig, as if the two sides could ever agree on a price to begin with, and if they did, could ever get along for more than 2 weeks, if he'd put Taz over. Hellwig said he didn't have problems doing a job, but that Heyman wanted to devalue an already established marketing persona. In other words, he had problems doing a job. He then said he'd go to ECW on one condition: it would have to be a shoot match, there's that word again. And if he was still standing after 30 seconds, he'd get total control of the company. WCW. For Havoc with the tag title change on Nitro, the tag title match has been changed to Konnan and Mysterio Jr. defending against Brian Knobbs and Hugh Morris. The Revolution and Harlem Heat are no longer on the listed card. I'm not sure what the idea of the lawyers with Sid were supposed to be on Nitro, except they wanted to show that lawyers are the physically toughest men on the planet. Did you see the little bald lawyer pop right up from Goldberg's spear? Since they are still listing Sid vs. Goldberg as a US title match. With only 7 matches announced: Sting vs. Hogan, Sid vs. Goldberg, Flair vs. Page, Hart vs. Luger, Berlin vs. Brad Armstrong, Disco vs. LaRue for the Cruiserweight title, and Konnan and Ray vs. Knobbs and Morris. You'd hope they'd add 2 to 3 more matches to the show, since such talent as Benoit, Malenko, Saturn, Kidman and Juventud at this point are all on the bench. Nitro on October 18th in Philadelphia at the Spectrum drew 7,413, paying $241,045. The show opened with Sid in a suit and tie coming out of a limo with lawyers. Juventud Guerrera no contest Courageous in 2:38 when Hart showed up and they had no idea what to do. Courageous isn't very good, but since Guerrera can't speak English well, he can't beat him, despite the fact Guerrera got great heat in the match and it was hot action until Hart showed up. Hart said he had been waiting his whole career for a match with Hogan, and now it looks like it'll never happen, selling the angle Hogan is fed up with the new committee and is leaving. Sting came out and offered Hart a title shot later in the show. Sting did a face promo which was weird, but the whole night was weird in that way. Schiavone said it was Russo and Ferrara's first show, saying they were the creative forces behind the WWF. Disco beat Vampiro in 1 minute. Lash LaRue came out for commentary and then attacked Disco after the match. Medusa claimed she was going to quit WCW over putting her in an evening gown match. She still can't deliver lines. They did the Nitro Girls Search segment. At least it was in the unopposed hour. Kimberly delivers lines better than most of the women in this business. Bagwell did a heel promo talking about he's in line for a big push. Kimberly was looking for David Flair. Konnan and Mysterio Jr. beat Harlem Heat for the tag belts in 6:56 when Mysterio Jr. gave Stevie Ray a springboard Thez press and Konnan held his legs down. Booker T looked really goofy in these shiny short shorts, almost like they were leftovers from the Lenny and Lodi characters. Mysterio Jr. is so good he almost made it seem like Stevie Ray was a good worker. Guerrero, who was terrible, Kidman and Torrie Wilson were doing commentary at ringside. Actually, Wilson didn't talk much, and said nothing about the match other than she said she had something on for Kidman later in the night. It was funny because Guerrero talked about how as wrestlers, Heat weren't even in Konnan and Ray's league, but then Kidman said that Booker T was a good worker. T was fighting with Eddie outside the ring when they double-teamed Ray for the yin. Kimberly tried to seduce David Flair because DDP was out of town. He was in Hollywood working on the movie. She gave David her room key. Filthy Animals celebrated the tag title win when Jimmy Hart, Morris and Knobbs came out and asked for a title shot at Havoc. Meng beat Morris in 340 with a Tongan death grip. I don't understand this result considering Morris was just announced as getting a title match on pay-per-view. Sid came in and brought out the attorneys. They were supposed to come out with him, but something got lost in the translation and they came out separately. They called out Goldberg. Goldberg speared this frail bald attorney, who got right back up from it and didn't sell it. Now that was bad. Sid power-bombed Goldberg and stuffed the contract in his mouth. Hall and Nash were making fun of Goldberg from ringside and he shoved them and they had a pull-apart. They supposedly threw Hall and Nash out of the building and did a show-long skit of them trying to sneak in, including once with Nash acting like he was drunk and supposedly throwing up. Unlike WWF, we actually didn't see the vomit come from his mouth on Doug Dillinger. Berlin beat Rick Steiner in 151 when the bodyguard hit Steiner with a chair. Brad Armstrong came out before the finish but Steiner choked him out, allowing the bodyguard to interfere. The plan is to give the bodyguard a big push. You remember Kevin Nash as Diesel with Shawn Michaels in the same role. Steiner beat up Armstrong after the match. Kimberly undressed expecting David Flair to be there and she for some reason was going to spike his drink, but instead Rick came out all crazed. We never did find out what happened here. Goldberg killed the clowns. Luger acted nervous about a match with Goldberg. Kidman beat David Flair in 233 with a shooting star press, and Kidman's knee hit David in the face, which looked real bad but he was okay. Tori Wilson opened up her coat revealing negligee, somewhat tame at least by WWF standards. David tried to get her to cover up. All the Filthy Animals beat up David after the match. Mona beat Medusa in the stripper match in 229. Fans booed this since Medusa was left in an aerobics outfit and didn't wear an evening gown and there was little to this match. Sting beat Hart in the WCW title match when Luger interfered and hit Hart in the ankle with a baseball bat and Sting used the Scorpion for the tap out. Very good for a Sting match. Ric Flair showed up mad about David being hurt and trying to find out who did it. Hall and Nash wore villainous masks and tried to talk Spanish. The idea was funny but like most of the Hall and Nash segments on the show, they lasted too long. Parker beat Bagwell with a Nzui-Giri in 229 and Jarrett clocked Bagwell after. This was also the point the show died. A three-way saw Chavo win over Eddie and Saturn in 853. No heat but the wrestling was very good. Two guys in the crowd thought they were watching WWF and doing it doggy style. The most dangerous spot saw them try and stack up superplex with Chavo on Saturn's shoulders giving Eddie a superplex. Chavo landed badly on his neck and he could have been hurt bad but after being shaken up appeared okay. Eddie hurt his ribs and was in pain after the match but no word on how serious the injury was. Match fell apart near the end. Eddie pinned Saturn after a frog splash, but unlike WCW three-ways, it continued and Chavo pinned Eddie after an awesome springboard tornado DDT. Norman Smiley beat Horace Hogan in 444 of a hardcore match when Hogan knocked himself out. They're playing that Smiley is a total pussy, crying in the ring, etc. Real loud boring chants here. Flair showed up and challenged all the animals. They came out and kicked his ass, making him look like a real idiot. David tried to make the save and they laid him out as well. Then they stole Rick's wallet, his watch, his rings, etc. They showed a broken guitar and Liz laid out. Either she wouldn't take the blow or they weren't allowed to show that kind of man-on-woman violence yet, but that took her out of the main event and further pushed Jarrett for Luger. Goldberg beat Luger in 753 with a spear and jackhammer. Hall, Nash, and Sting were all out there as well. Hart came out and got out the bat and went to hit Sting with it but he moved and the bat broke on the ring post. Hart put Sting in the Scorpion but Luger broke it up and racked Hart. While racking Hart, Goldberg speared him to lead to the pin. Fans in the building were said to be totally confused during the Bagwell match. Shane Douglas should be groomed for a spot as a color commentator. The Flair career-ending injury apparently nixes the previously planned Flair vs. Benoit feud. The plan to keep Revolution together may be changed. There were plans to break Malenko away and feud with Saturn, and who knows about those plans because they were lame duck ideas, but now it appears they want to break Benoit from the group so they can push him as a top single. There is already becoming some resentment in the company, not necessarily directed as Russo and Ferrara, but at the upper management. The word from above is that they are getting everything they request when it comes to decision-making and even production improvements. Others that were in charge are complaining that many in power wanted similar to even the exact same changes and management wouldn't listen. For months everyone involved in creative has vehemently complained about the 3-hour Nitro being a killer, and wanted the show cut to 2 hours and there wasn't even lip service given to the requests. Now it's a strong probability to happen as soon as possible. At this point Thunder being cut to 1 hour isn't as likely for an immediate change, although the show is moving to Wednesdays starting in January due to the falling ratings with competition from SmackDown. The public version of the story is that they want to air more Atlanta Braves games next season and they have more games on Thursdays. But if that were the case, they'd wait for baseball season next year to make the change. Looking at ratings and trying to gain the biggest audience, giving up the unopposed hour of Nitro, 8 to 9 p.m., which last week drew nearly double the rating of the opposed hours, seems to be on paper a huge mistake because it eliminates the period where it can shoot angles in front of the widest audience and hopefully build main events for the second hour. Going head-to-head for 2 hours is because of the feeling they can put on more risque television at a later time slot, although with the viewer demographics, that argument is great when arguing with people with no brain, but there's no validity to the argument. Thunder on October 11th from Baton Rouge, Louisiana was a total mess. The idea, which I believe came from Russo, was to put Kevin Nash and Scott Hall on the announcing team for the show and turn the announcing into a shoot, which is definitely his philosophy. I don't disagree with the philosophy, but it was apparent within 5 minutes that we can add color commentary to the list of things, wrestling, doing interviews and booking, that Nash can't handle. He started by saying that everyone said he was a bad booker, but he was smart enough to book himself into a retirement angle so he doesn't have to take any bumps and still makes big money, so they're trying to get something out of their investment in him by making him an announcer. He spent the rest of the show doing his "I'm too cool for wrestling" gimmick, which would work if he was funny. As it was, he was the epitome of a bore. It's bad enough to constantly try for jokes and come up short, but it's worse when you're out there laughing at your own jokes while the other two guys are groaning. You could see Larry Zbyszko being less than enthralled with the announcing going down the toilet, and eventually he started making comebacks on Nash. It's considered something of a no-no in WCW to on-air make fun of the true weaknesses of the top talent, and was carving him up like a Thanksgiving turkey. So much for the myth about Nash having a quick wit. It was Nash's lame duck show and came off that way, and he even joked it was being thrown together at the last minute, true, although it wasn't all his fault, because there were numerous no-shows. Hall, who as Nash said, nobody had seen since the wee hours of Tuesday a.m., and WCW even got complaints from the hotel that night about Hall's behavior, headed the list, which was why Nash was out there on his own. It's time to give up the ghost and fire Hall. He's been given more opportunities to get his life together and it's just not happening. Over the last year, add up the weeks he's worked as compared with the weeks he hasn't and figure if it's really worth $1.6 million, and even when he's there is half the time in no condition to perform. WCW has always had a double standard when it came to company discipline, and virtually every entertainment company and most sports teams are going to have them, as well as stars can get away with a lot that non-stars can't. It's the nature of celebrityhood, but overall had little if any discipline to begin with under Bischoff. If the company wants to get its act together, it can't tolerate people whose jobs are so important to them that they no-show television without at least a justifiable reason. If the company doesn't use Hall to set an example, then no matter what Russo does, they're dead in the water anyway over the long haul when it comes to discipline problems down the line, not to mention walking headlong into more tragedies as if there haven't been enough of them already. And it isn't as if a half-dozen car wrecks in a one-year period isn't a pretty good warning sign that something bad may be on the verge of happening. Sid and another main eventer, not positive as to who, also no-showed. The TV main was scheduled as Sid and Steiner versus Bagwell and another guy, and Luger replaced Sid and La Parka replaced the other guy. Nash and Hall have also proposed the idea, which Nash talked about on the air, about the second hour of WCW Saturday Night being their own variety show which they would host along with Mark Madden. At this point it's just a proposal. Results from the live show saw Jim Duggan pin Buddy Lee Parker in 4:19 after a knee drop. Nash spent the rest of the show mocking Tenay's call of Duggan's finisher as the Old Glory by calling Mysterio Jr.'s move an Old Glory Hurricane Rana, and the like so many times Tenay even told Nash he wore the joke out. Nash said that he didn't think he had and continued with the line the rest of the show. Of course the match was terrible, but Duggan is still remembered from the mid-80s when he was the biggest star in Baton Rouge. Lash LaRue pinned Al Green with the whiplash in 2:14. Luger did an interview talking about how he's been a main eventer from his start and that he had big star talent and athletic ability, and that's why he's been on top and a champion his whole career, and knocked the guys who complained as being too small to cut it. Bagwell came in. Steiner jumped Bagwell and La Parka made the save with a chair. Nash made fun of Steiner and Lex backing off from Parka, which was booked as a practical joke, saying Luger was afraid of skeletons. Knobbs and Morris beat Scott and Steve Armstrong in 4:19 when Knobbs pinned Scott after a moonsault. Knobs cut a promo on the Armstrongs acting like he thought they were Harlem Heat. "They all look the same to me also." Bryan Adams pinned Horace Hogan in 411 after a pile driver. Lash did his first interview. It was well thought out, by the Cajun accent isn't going to help him nationally, but it did work live. Berlin pinned Prince Iaukea in 3:58 after a neckbreaker. Meng beat Luther Biggs in 1:19 after a Tongan death grip. Nash noted how whenever there's a package on somebody, they aired a Meng piece before the match. It's almost a sure bet that guy's going to win. Meng then put the death grip on Buzz Stern. So much for that gimmick. Mysterio Jr. pinned Saturn with a head scissors into a cradle in 6:09 in the only good match on the show. Saturn hit Mysterio Jr. with a chain after the match. Saturn ended up with a split lip. Main event had the dreaded SC finish. Bagwell got mad at Parka and gave him the blockbuster and walked out. Parka was getting double-teamed and the show just ended. Nash asked Mike Tenay how many times Rick Steiner was an All-American in college. Tenay said a few times. The correct answer is 0. It was his brother who was one once. Apparently Hogan was the one who came up with the idea to put together the program where management wants him out a la Steve Austin as a way to get over stronger as a face, playing it up to everyone as a shoot, and Russo and Ferraro went with it. There really isn't a lot of negativity internally about it like you'd think, because Bischoff was forever trying to work the boys on angles as well. It was discussed to us that it may have hurt Bill Bush's rep with some talent because Bush was very well liked as an honest guy, and after the angle at Nitro, he was running around making a big deal about looking for Hogan, who had stormed off. The question was, were they working Bush, which is hard to believe, or was Bush working the boys backstage to get the angle over, which would kill his rep as a straight shooter. There's always the chance Hogan himself is playing a little bit of Pillman. Pillman worked an angle in conjunction with Eric Bischoff and Kevin Sullivan, letting nobody else in, but forgot to let Bischoff and Sullivan in on the fact his ultimate goal was to work them into a fake early release of his contract, get the angle over to the office and the rest of management, except that fake early release, which was real on paper, allowed him to negotiate out of his deal and join the WWF, which wasn't his goal. But his goal was to use the WWF to up his price. But the Humvee wreck basically ruined his leverage and he signed with the WWF because they offered a more secure contract. In this case, Hogan may use the angle where he's working he's leaving to once again play another potential deal with a company that wants to get in the game, thinking they can build around Hogan and Jim Hellwig. That's again being talked about behind the scenes, and using his WCW angle as a way to run his own storyline transition. There is talk that from this point forward, all WCW contracts will be structured along the lines of WWF deals with downside guarantees and incentives built in. The changes in the WCW road schedule of taping Thunders on Tuesdays will now begin in December, and the show's air date will be moved to Wednesday, to avoid the competition from SmackDown, which has destroyed its ratings. The public statement is the show is being moved to enable them to air more Atlanta Braves games. But if that was the case, they'd make the move in April. The new major event schedule for December is December 2nd, Final Thunder taping on a Thursday, Thunder in Topeka, Kansas, December 5th House Show in Chicago at United Center, December 6th Nitro in Milwaukee at the Arena, December 7th WCW Saturday Night taping in Madison, Wisconsin, December 13th Nitro at the New Orleans Arena, December 14th Thunder taping in Mobile, Alabama, December 19th Starrcade in Washington, D.C. at MCI Arena, December 20th Nitro in Baltimore, December 21st WCW Saturday Night taping in Salisbury, Maryland, December 27th New Year's Evil Nitro at the Astrodome in Houston, December 28th Thunder taping in Beaumont, Texas. For January, the major events are Nitro January 3rd in Greenville, South Carolina, Thunder January 4th in Florence, South Carolina, WCW Saturday Night January 5th in Rock Hill, South Carolina, Nitro January 10th in Buffalo, Thunder January 11th in Erie, Pennsylvania, January 16th sold-out pay-per-view from Cincinnati First Star Center, January 17th Nitro from Columbus, Ohio, January 18th Thunder from Louisville at Broadbent Arena, January 19th WCW Saturday Night taping from Evansville, Indiana, January 24th Nitro in Los Angeles at the new Staples Arena. That's really a risk doing a Nitro in LA, which has never been done before, because of the 5 p.m. TV starting time in the rush hour traffic. January 25th Thunder from Las Vegas MGM Grand Garden Arena, January 27th House Show in Atlanta at Phillips Arena, and January 31st Nitro in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. The current February schedule lists a United Kingdom tour from February 4th to February 7th, followed by a German tour from February 10th to February 13th. The plan is to tape Nitro on February 7th in the UK. There are no dates listed for Thunder tapings in February. They only have the major shows for February finalized, with the other Nitros being February 14th at the Nassau Coliseum, February 21st in Sacramento, and February 28th in Minneapolis at Target Center. And the February Super Brawl pay-per-view will be from the Cow Palace in San Francisco. Flair is pushing to turn back heel. He's very unhappy about the direction of his character, and again there is talk of him retiring as an in-ring performer. Ian Hodgkinson, Vampiro, was given word before Thunder that they were going to exercise their 90-day option on him to drop the 4-year $350,000 per year deal that Bischoff signed with him just before he was let go, and that he wouldn't be pushed anymore. This change would become effective on December 7th. Hodgkinson did approach Terry Taylor in WWF, but at this point WWF hasn't even seriously considered him until they see a written WCW release, which he was hoping to get on October 19th. Before Nitro 4 days later, Vince Russo told him they wanted to push him and that he had no say-so when it came to contracts. Dillon then offered him $175,000 per year plus first-class travel. He indicated that he was most likely leaving. Later he was told he'd have a 15-minute television match with Disco Inferno that he'd lose. When he got to the ring, after the first kick, the referee told the guys to go home immediately, which he thought was a swerve. Hodgkinson told ICP, who returned, what happened, and they told him they were walking out with him. It wouldn't be an issue of the Observer without ICP threatening to walk out on some promotion. ICP was also unhappy because they were yelled at backstage by Goldberg, who didn't like the way they handled themselves in their angle. At this point, they were saying they were done with WCW and negotiating elsewhere. After Nitro in Philadelphia, word got to Paul Heyman and there were at least preliminary talks about a contract with Vampiro, and ICP was calling through their agent. Heyman said that he had no interest in ICP because of the way they agreed to come in, then backed out days before the pay-per-view, although WCW would have to release Vampiro first. On October 19th, WCW upped its offer to Vampiro to $200,000 and promised him a push, saying that Russo said he wanted him badly, but agreed that if he wanted to they'd give him the release to work ECW on October 20th, and at press time, he was wavering between ECW and WCW. Nothing is definite at this writing, but if Vampiro got his WCW release immediately as opposed to waiting until the deal expires on December 7th, which is what he asked for, and could come to terms with ECW, which is what he was hoping to do, he would start at the ECW arena on October 23rd. James Fullington aka Hawk, $250,000 per year, was also fired in another cost-cutting measure, although again the belief is they'd be willing to keep him on either one of those $500 per night deals or on lower-priced guaranteed deal. The complete list of those dropped from contract are Johnny Attitude, Mike Enos, as of November 2nd, Arturo Flores, who briefly played the role of Eddie Guerrero's LWO bodyguard and was rarely used after that, as of November 8th, Brett Hamner, who is already in ECW as Big Dick Hertz, the bodyguard for Simon Diamond, using the name popularized by Jerry Graham when he'd get arrested for his weekly drunk and disorderly charges in the 70s and 80s and give the police that as his name. Barry Horowitz, Hard Body Harrison, Scott Norton, as of December 31st, Scott Vick, Sick Boy, Barry Darso, Chad Fortune, Fullington. As of December 7th, Marcus Johnson, who played the NWO referee, Robert Smedley, Bobby Blaze, and Eric Watts, as of November 30th. This is believed to be nowhere near the end of the cost slashing. They also want to do a full-blown hardcore division, which Bischoff nixed due to all the injuries that resulted from it. And there is talk of phasing out the cruiserweight division as a separate, although it was never truly kept separate to begin with, entity. While Hawk is pretty bad when it comes to working straight wrestling matches without gimmicks, he takes the crazy bumps and understands how to work a hardcore style match, although his body won't last long doing matches the way he did them earlier this year, and his regular slew of injuries is a testament to that. Hawk used longtime friend Todd Gordon to shop him around. Paul Heyman had vehemently denied interest in bringing him back because of how he left, without even a phone call saying he was leaving or giving any notice, but inside the locker room the general belief is that he'll be back shortly. Gordon approached WWF this past week trying to sell them on the idea that Heyman wants him back badly, but he'd rather go to WWF. With WWF and ECW having seemingly a more cozy business relationship than anyone wants to let on publicly, the feeling in WWF was that they didn't want to do anything to hurt Heyman, and also couldn't see a spot for him, so McMahon passed on the deal. Heyman's latest statements regarding Fullington are that he recognizes it would be a big pop in the Northeast, but he doesn't think the business relationship between the two of them would be long-lasting, nor does he like the precedent it would set for the guys in the company, thinking they could walk out in that manner and still have a job if they fail at the big-time level. Raven is pushing hard to bring him back, feeling he needs more over babyfaces to work with, and others are pushing the idea of bringing him back as a face negates completely the loss of Taz. Heyman hinted he'd bring him back if Fullington could get out of his contract before December 7th, presumably for a big pop on the November to Remember pay-per-view, but that he'd only pay him $1,500 per week, as opposed to the $3,000 per week he was making when he left. Anyway, at this point all of this from both sides is best labeled negotiating posturing. There has been a lot of mainstream media interest in Bob Mould due to his background as almost a legendary writer known within the rock music industry from the 80s. Mould was part of two very popular and influential alternative rock bands, Husker Du in the 80s and Sugar in the 90s, and is considered as almost a legendary figure in alternative rock. His influence, whatever it would have been, has lessened greatly since Russo and Ferrara came aboard. When Entertainment Weekly called WCW wanting to do an item mentioning WCW hiring Mould, the people working PR had never heard of Mould. He is also working on a separate story about Russo. With the Gates for Thunder doing so poorly, they are adding non-television dark matches to the show, so October 28th in San Diego and November 10th in Fort Wayne, Indiana will have Sting vs. Hart for the title. November 19th in Cleveland has Goldberg vs. Luger, Hart vs. Flair, Benoit and Malenko vs. Knobs and Morris, Brad Armstrong vs. Berlin, Iaukea vs. Miller, Kid Romeo vs. Lash LaRue and Evan Courageous vs. Kendall Windham plus ICP will make an appearance. December 5th will be a major house show in Chicago with Goldberg vs. Luger, Sting vs. Hart, Benoit vs. Flair, Heat vs. Vicious and Rick Steiner, Bagwell vs. Berlin, ICP vs. Knobs and Morris with Mancow in ICP's corner, Malenko vs. Saturn and Disco vs. Miller. There will also be a lot of late November house shows headlined by Harlem Heat vs. Vicious and Rick Steiner, and they are, can you believe this, running Berlin vs. Duggan on a lot of house shows as well, and for whatever this is worth, in South Texas shows they are doing Mysterio Jr. and Kidman vs. Juventud Guerrera and Eddie Guerrero matches. Jim Cornette's comments on Vince Russo's departure in Mike Mooneyham's Wrestling Observer Hotline report on October 11th were, he has no respect for the wrestling business or anybody in it. And that's going to be more obvious there where they won't have anyone to control him. I think Ultimate Warrior deserved the money he made more than Russo. I have always in the past thought the Ultimate Warrior was the epitome of a guy making money with no talent. Sable deserved her money more than Russo. At least she didn't try to make the entire business a joke, just her part of it, because of her lack of talent. He is a great self-promoter who has made all the internet people believe he is a genius responsible for the WWF turnaround. He went crazy with all the pressure and decided to stab in the back the guy who brought him into the business, McMahon, and take a big money deal, which I'm sure they offered because they're grasping at straws. He'll be out of the business in 2 years because without the WWF organization behind me, he'll fall flat on his face. They'll pay him until the end of his contract, and then he'll be done. He burned the bridge behind him and he won't be back. He knows he doesn't know what he's doing. He knew WCW was desperate and finally realized it was time to cash in. He doesn't care about being in the wrestling business. He hates wrestling. He likes entertainment. He thinks he's a TV writer now, and it's gone to his head. He's got a head the size of Texas. Randy Savage filmed an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger, a few weeks back. It's the same episode that Frank Shamrock has a starring role in. I believe it's scheduled for a November 14th air date, which is the same night as both Survivor Series and the next UFC pay-per-view. The trio of Evan Courageous, Shane Helms and Shannon Moore have already done a Jimmy Hart set-up music video as 3 count. From someone who has seen it, girls will love it and guys will hate it. Speaking of Hart, he captained a team of Brian Knobs, Scotty Riggs, Jim Duggan and Hugh Morris to a 3-2 win over Playboy Playmates on a Family Feud show taped October 15th in Los Angeles. House shows for the past week saw the WCW Saturday Night taping on October 12th in Thibodaux, Louisiana drew 1,081 paying $23,020 and Thunder on October 14th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana drew 2,529, 4,941 tickets distributed, paying $54,799. Merchandise for the week starting with Nitro on October 11th in Biloxi and finishing with Nitro on October 18th in Philadelphia was $88,536 or $5.40 per head. The new Alltel Arena in Little Rock, which was scheduled to open with an NBA exhibition game on October 12th, had to cancel its sold-out opening due to structural flaws within the building. Some steel rods inside a support beam were deeper than they should have been, causing cracks in the concrete. It shouldn't affect Nitro directly as far as the show taking place, but may make it a slightly harder sell locally. At this point they've sold about 3,700 tickets for that show. After a terrible September at the gate, there has been some minor encouragement in some markets. Oakland and San Diego, October 22nd house show and October 28th Thunder, are doing terribly. Las Vegas won't sell out, but will do respectably. Phoenix, where WCW draws its worst TV ratings of almost any major market in the country, already has more than 8,000 tickets sold for the October 25th Nitro. So go figure. Minneapolis Nitro November 1st is at 4,200 tickets, which isn't good, and Indianapolis Nitro November 8th is considered decent with 5,000 tickets sold. Fort Wayne, Indiana Thunder November 10th is doing poorly, while November 22nd Nitro at Auburn Hills, Michigan has just under 4,000 tickets sold, which is at least not disastrous. The Star City is Toronto, which sold more than 8,000 tickets for $333,000 the first day they went on sale for Bret Hart challenging Sting for the WCW title. At least that's the plan going in. I'm guessing this will change after Sunday and Monday's TV angles on the Mayhem pay-per-view. Even so, that's a big difference, as the first show in the market, which drew one of the hottest Nitro crowds ever, sold out in minutes. WWF. The initial valuation of WWFE stock before it went public, with 17% of the company being put on sale at a valuation of $137 million, would make the value of 100% of the stock at $806 million. That would, on paper, make the remaining 83% of the stock owned by the McMahon family be worth $669 million. By the end of the first day of trading, by the time the stock opened initially at 32, the McMahon family's WWF stock would have been worth, on paper the family's paper worth would have grown to $1.56 billion. But at 25th of January 4th at the end of the day, it was back down to $1.23 billion. I guess now WCW can spread press releases about having to defend themselves against an evil billionaire. With the company's stock at this point in total worth almost $1.7 billion, it's actually the same figure all those erroneous media reports during the 1992 steroid scandal had the company worth in the first place, so those reports weren't necessarily all that inaccurate. They may just have been ahead of their time. It appears the Survivor Series will have the Triple H vs. Rock vs. Austin three-way on top, plus China vs. Jericho for the IC title, Bossman vs. Show for the Hardcore title, and probably Hollies vs. Outlaws for the tag titles. Raw on October 18th drew 10,843 fans, about 1,400 tickets shy of capacity, paying $312,898 to the Schottenstein Center in Columbus, Ohio. The show opened with Rock doing a promo talking about his title match at Survivor Series with Triple H. Austin came out and said that Rock had cost him the match the previous night and he deserved the shot. Vince came out and called for Triple H to come out. When all was said and done, Vince announced it would be a three-way main event. X-Pac and Kane beat Dudleys in 2:45 when Kane pinned Bubba with a choke slam after the headbangers distracted the Dudleys. Bangers and Dudleys brawled after. Bossman challenged Show to a hardcore title match later in the show. Moolah and Mae Young did an interview. Young challenged Moolah to a title match for the SmackDown tapings. Moolah decked her and she took yet another bump and they had a pull-apart brawl. As amazing as it is to see Mae Young take all these bumps every night, this stuff is way past old in more ways than one. Show accepted the challenge. Mark Henry had a fourth sex therapist, this time a large woman who looked like Janet Reno. She jumped his bones on the couch and he didn't appear to like it. Viscera pinned Godfather in 2:08 with a splash after Godfather went after Midian. Godfather actually did a pretty decent dropkick in this match. Mankind gave Rock his book and gave him Rocco as a bookmark. Rock told Mankind he could keep Rocco, but Mankind thought he was being generous. Hilarious stuff. They can't break up this chemistry. Chyna gave out with Miss Kitty, dressed as Mini Chyna with jet black hair. Jericho came out and did his best WWF promo to date, saying how WWF had disgraced wrestling by making Chyna the IC title, how they had disgraced the belt held by such greats as Ricky Steamboat, Randy Savage, Rick Rude and the Mountie. That was hilarious. Clearly Jericho, who was going into Flounderland, was given Jarrett's spot, which is ironic since they both left their previous employer for almost the exact same reasons. Aside from similar hair color, one clearly has 5 times the potential star power as the other, but that's another story. Chyna clocked him with the belt and he took a bump off the apron and it appeared he was supposed to go through the table, but didn't quite fly far enough and the table didn't break. Test beat Bulldog via DQ when the Mean Street Posse interfered at 2:16. After the match, Bulldog dropped a garbage can on Test 3 times and power slammed him. Throughout the show, Farouk was playing cards against Curtis Hughes and Farouk kept winning. Finally Hughes was left with nothing, so the acolytes told him to put up his bitch, meaning Howard Finkel, who they kept calling Harold. And of course Farouk won the hand, so I guess Harold is now the acolyte's bitch. Al Snow found Foley's book in the garbage can and Foley was furious that Rock had thrown it away. It'll probably come out that Rock never threw it away. Venus beat Snow in 4:37 with the money shot. This was a much better match than you'd think. It seemed both guys went out there with the idea they were going to show they were more than just their gimmick personalities. Fans didn't care about the wrestling, whether it was good or bad. Mankind then cut a hell of a promo on Rock about throwing away the book while Rock claimed he ever threw it away. They sure pushed the book hard. Bossman was in the ring to wrestle Show, but Show got the word his dad died and was broken up. What was disturbing wasn't this angle, but that Ross and Lawler were shot the exact same way and reacted in almost an identical fashion as far as their tones and carefully chosen words to their reactions when Owen Hart died in Kansas City. The thought process behind all this is both brilliant and rather sick. Since deaths in wrestling are so frequent, they are doing angles like this to make deaths part of the work, so further make it like the real deaths aren't real either. I did feel sorry for them having to sell this because I sensed both being uncomfortable watching this with having to reprise their role in the Owen Hart deal as an angle just a few months later. As it turned out later in the show, they showed Bossman paying off the guy who told Show his dad was dead. So his dad, who is really dead, is actually still alive. This idea no doubt came from the deal last summer when J.J. Dillon told Bret Hart that Stu had just died before a pay-per-view main event in Baltimore. It was actually a prank call from someone with a lot of inside knowledge. Outlaws beat Acolytes in 5:58 in a match highlighted by the top rope breaking. It made a fake match look even more fake with Billy Gunn carefully not hitting the ropes. He also juiced during the match. Finkel threw in a chair but Gunn got hit and hit Bradshaw, allowing Road Dogg to pin him with a jackknife cradle. Acolytes got mad at Finkel for costing them the match and they gave him this giant wedgie with tearaway underwear and took him into the bathroom where they teased they were going to horribly torture him. A lot of people thought the horror was going to be the raping of the Fink, but they don't do murder, only cancer deaths, and they don't do rape, except if the man wins the woman in a wrestling match, in which case it's okay because the woman deserves it. Actually, the horror was that Moolah and Mae Young were going to strip in front of him. They brought out the Hardy Boys, Edge and Gangrel, and put the ladder match over as the greatest ladder match in the history of the WWF. That was a major slap in the face of Shawn Michaels, and don't think that was part of its intentions. I don't mean to knock the match, because it was tremendous, and I think it's great that guys who work that hard to have a great match are given recognition and a chance to be elevated from it. Remember the great job WCW did in never once mentioning after the fact such legit classics as Eddie Guerrero vs. Ray Jr. at Havoc in 1997 and Blitzkrieg vs. Juvie earlier this year, and how much those matches did to elevate the participants. But the two Michaels Razor Ramon matches had intensity of a classic wrestling match with tremendous spots involved, while this was fans not into it as a match but loving it as a demonstration of guys doing great high spots and taking very dangerous bumps with no intensity or importance as to the outcome, only importance to how dangerous or impressive the spots themselves were. All four were overselling by walking really gingerly. The Hardys said they were no longer the Brood, they were Matt and Jeff Hardy, basically using it as a face turn. Fans gave all four a nice ovation, with many of them standing, although the standing O spot on Raw was done because fans were pretty much told to do so. Not that many were not appreciative of their performance the night before, because if they saw it they would have been, but it was more of a set-up television spot, whereas the reaction the night before from the fans after the match was legit emotion and appreciation. All four shook hands. One more note. In the commercials for the replay show, even though this was going in just a filler match on the card, they promoted the replay largely based on how spectacular this match was, along with the Austin Triple H main event. Gangrel and Terry Runnels came out. Gangrel said he was the only one who scored the previous night and all four jumped him. Runnels then left with the Hardy Boys. GTV showed Bossman paying the guy off to give Show the news about his dad dying. The show ended with Hollies winning the tag titles from Mankind and Rock. Mankind sat on the ring steps with his back toward the ring and only a few times even turned around and glanced, mainly ignoring Rock. Rock, with taped ribs from selling the attack the night before. Usually when Rock gets injured on PPVs, he's all healed by TV the next night, sold almost the entire match. The match had very good heat since the 2-on-1, particularly with Rock, got people into it. Hollies did a good here again. Finally Rock made the comeback and hit the rock bottom on Bob to a louder than usual pop. Triple H ran in and gave Rock a pedigree, allowing Bob to pin him in 7:30. Mankind then walked out on him. After the match, Austin attacked Triple H in the entryway and they wound up in the ring where Rock used the rock bottom on Triple H. Rock set up the people's elbow, but Austin cut him off and gave him a stunner instead. Rock and Austin glared at each other as the show ended. This final segment was really well done. They are planning on putting together vignettes to start airing soon to hype the debuts of Taz and Kurt Angle. Undertaker's current physical situation is he's sidelined with a nagging groin tear and a lower abdominal strain. He can't walk without pain. They are hoping for him to return for Survivor Series, but that's considered highly doubtful, and the date they are shooting for would be the December pay-per-view. He may appear on television to shoot an angle a few weeks before actually being able to wrestle in the ring. The WWF has also been insistent that Ken Shamrock see another specialist about his neck. Besides adding Burt Prentice's Music City Wrestling Group to the list of smaller Tennessee companies they are sending developmental talent to, they are also looking at formalizing a deal with Leigh Thatcher to both train wrestlers on developmental deals and have them wrestle on his Heartland Wrestling shows. Scotty Saber, real name Scott Overholzer from Michigan, who holds the Ohio Valley Wrestling Junior Heavyweight title and is something of a Chris Jericho-looking wrestler in his early 20s. Very green wrestling but looks to have potential, is a WWF developmental wrestler. Amy Dumars, Miss Congeniality in ECW, has been talked with. The original plan was to bring her in because people who have seen her wrestle in the ring have said she's got potential to be a good performer. At first, Paul Heyman told WWF people that he had no real plans for her, and they were looking at bringing her in. Heyman changed his mind and indicated he had ideas for her, and since there is something of a working relationship, the plan seems to be for the WWF to sign her up but let Heyman use her for a while. The latest on Christina Lom Kimona is that she was at WWF headquarters on October 14th for what was described as a pre-job interview. It was described as being possible that she'll be offered a developmental contract or even a regular contract, but the final decisions haven't been made. There are no plans for the foreseeable future to use Shawn Michaels on television. He has heat with most of the top talent in the company and management for a variety of reasons, including his WWF web chat where he complained about Austin as champion not putting Triple H over cleanly at SummerSlam. SmackDown tapings on October 12th in Birmingham, Alabama opened with Mick Foley playing dumb and convincing Vince McMahon to book he and Rock as a tag team. He also plugged his book coming out on October 20th. McMahon and Foley's interplay was so hilarious. Triple H came out with makeup on his face to make him look like Woody in Something About Mary, supposedly from the snake bite on Raw, and said he was quitting and basically tried to play heel as the critics of WWF are saying it was out of control in the wake of the DROZ publicity. Fans didn't buy he was quitting for a second. He said he'd hand the belt to Austin later in the show. Kane told X-Pac to stay out of his business. Acolytes then beat Kane with a double-team powerbomb in 444 and X-Pac made the save with a chair, but this time Kane got mad at him. Mankind talked to Stevie Richards, who wanted to be his best friend, but Mankind said he had a best friend in The Rock. Test sure can't act. He did a promo with Michael Hayes. Since he's an announcer, shouldn't he be Doc Hendricks? Mankind talked Rock into being his partner for one last match. Mankind's gimmick is that he pretends to be dumb, but he's outsmarting the smartest guys in the company to get what he wants. I think Jerry Jarrett used to play that gimmick. Jericho beat Hughes in 1 minute with a chair shot to the head and when Finkel distracted the ref. Jericho then told Hughes he was fired but he was giving him a consolation prize. Finkel. Hughes seemed happy to get Finkel but Finkel was scared, trying to play into the stereotype of the big black prisoner and his white boy unwilling sex partner. Ross interviewed Big Show about his father. That acting was even worse than tests. Mark Henry this time had a male sex therapist who they insinuated was gay and he walked out on him. Bossman won the hardcore title in a three-way over Show and Snow when he pinned Show after a nightstick shot to the head off the apron in 255 and Show juiced for him as well. Venus pinned Richards, dressed as Dude Love, with the money shot in 255. Triple H went out in an ambulance from a bad reaction to the snakebite. Stephanie McMahon was shown at dinner with Bulldog, who ended up making a big ruckus. Godfather beat Mideon and after the match Viscera attacked and laid out Godfather. Jarrett did an interview where Deborah came out and said she'd be in Chyna's corner for their pay-per-view match. Finally, Rock and Mankind beat Outlaws to win the belts when Mankind pinned Billy Gunn after Bob Holly interfered and hit him with the title belt. Tag champs where one partner doesn't want to team with the other. Where have we seen that gimmick before? Like really recently. The show ended with Triple H saying he was going to give Austin the belt, but instead attacked him with it and he and Chyna were pounding on him. After the show went off the air, Austin gave Triple H a million stunners. It's pretty well been decreed, at least temporarily, that Jericho is being slated for a mid-card role and they've been disappointed in his work. There have been a lot of excuses thrown around as to why Jericho isn't working out like they expected. 90% of them are what I call old schoolisms, you know. The weather was bad or it's late in the month, so the money is tight, and that's why we didn't draw rather than admit the most simplest of things. What was booked nobody was interested in. But the answer is simple. Look at how he's been programmed in the ring from day one. If you're programmed as one of the guys, you become just another one of the guys, which is the slot he's being taken as being in. He didn't beat Road Dogg or X-Pac clean in major matches, and in developing a mid-card guy, results don't matter, but in developing a top-of-the-card superstar, they have to beat everyone but the other top-of-the-card superstars. He was hurt a lot, and presumably with the exception of the Road Dogg match in England, which people talked of highly, I've yet to see the tape, he hasn't had a match the caliber of the matches he used to have in WCW, but by and large, that's also only a minor part of his perception to the audience. He'd easily overcome that if he was beating the big boys. His failure to get any W's against top guys is why the people don't take him as a top guy. Him getting more aggressive and wrestling a more athletic style may very well help, but his perception has absolutely nothing to do with what he is and isn't doing inside the ring. He's still not going to get heat inside the ring because fans come to WWF to see the soap, and the fans do respond to his interviews like he's a recognizable player. After opening verbally dueling Rock and Undertaker, and then finally debuting on a pay-per-view against X-Pac and not winning, how can anyone see that as anything but a guy going down, and nobody wants to get into a guy they see as not working out? Excuses on why his matches in the ring haven't gotten heat miss the entire point that is so obvious even glancing at WWF television the past few months. With the exception of Rock and Austin, nobody gets heat in television matches anymore. Austin basically gets heat for everything he does, and Rock gets heat in his key spots but not throughout. Even Foley doesn't get that much heat in the ring in his television matches. Christian and Edge and the Hardy Boys kill themselves on every show and have great matches that get no heat. Triple H does great promos, and once his match starts, unless it's against Rock or Austin, he gets no heat. The New York Daily News on October 18 ran a lengthy story about Jericho, but it was mainly the coincidence that his father was Ted Irvine and played for the Rangers for many years. The story was really about why he wasn't a hockey player than a story about a wrestler. On the Billboard Rec Sports video chart, The Rock video beat out Austin for the #1 spot, and WWF had the first 7, Rock, Austin, Best of Raw, Austin, Women of WWF, Best of Survivor Series, Austin, and 12 of the top 20. WCW's highest was the Hogan video at number 9, followed by Flair at number 12, and Wrestling with Shadows was at number 18. The Toronto Sun noted the WWF having lukewarm interest in buying the Canadian Football League's Toronto Argonauts, although WWF Canada President Carl DeMarco in the same report denied having any interest in purchasing the Argonauts or any CFL team. According to WWF officials, one advantage of Russo and Ferrara not booking is there is already more long-term planning going on. Russo and Ferrara basically booked 1 week ahead of time. Occasional big angles or pay-per-view main events might be booked with more lead time, but generally speaking that's how it was done. There's an attempt now to book farther ahead and book backwards from the destination point, which is how a lot of the old-style booking was done. Foley will be appearing on October 28th, and maybe October 27th, for the opening week of the Beyond the Mat movie at the AMC Century City Theater near Los Angeles. Foley's book, which comes out this week, was given 4 stars in its first review, which was from Jane Magazine, a magazine aimed at women, which is a surprising source for a 4-star review of a pro wrestling book. The positive thing is that if this book gets positive reviews and does well, it will break the stigma in the publishing world that wrestling fans can't read. When I was in the past interested in writing a book, that was the regular response, and no quoting of television ratings would change that, and that any book about wrestling has to be schlock. Foley is also scheduled on the Conan O'Brien and Howard Stern shows before you read this, and will appear on Wrestling Observer Live on October 29th. The book from pre-sale orders was already ranked number 10 on the Amazon.com bestseller list for this week. There will be a Rock bio coming out next, and Austin after that. The Rock bio, unlike this one, was written partially in character as The Rock and partially as Dwayne Johnson. A lot of people, including some in the company, are upset about the Paul White angle where his father has cancer. As many know, his father passed away a few years ago in real life, which is probably where he draws some of the emotion that he conveys on television in trying to pull it off. Austin appears on Nash Bridges on October 22nd. The A&E bio on Austin runs November 15th, which is head-to-head with the first hour of Nitro on a Monday, 8 p.m., and the night before the Owen Hart bio. I expect those 2 A&E shows will be entirely different. Triple H and Chyna appear on the Martin Short show on November 11th. They are running Madison Square Garden more often over the next few months. On December 4th, for a regular house show, they are putting the first tickets on sale for Royal Rumble at MSG on January 23rd, and will follow that up with a live Raw on February 28. Sylvester Turkey, who wrestled one match for UFO in Japan as UFO Big Van Vader, officially signed his WWF developmental contract, as had been expected for some time. The Richmond, Virginia Times-Dispatch had a lengthy interview with Rock in the October 17 paper. He noted that he writes all his own material. He claimed even with his success there is little jealousy directed toward him. In regard to comments by Road Dogg, Rock said, "He's very insecure and he's one that can be very jealous. Ironically enough, the guys at the very top of this industry in our company, and I'm going to speak of right now, two guys, The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin, have without a shadow of a doubt been my two biggest supporters and confidants in this industry. And why I say ironically is, because with those guys at the top of the business, we are competing for the same spot. But those guys are secure enough with their positions within the company to realize we got a guy in The Rock, who is 27, who has already done what he's done. He's going to help us make millions more dollars. We welcome him. A guy like the Road Dogg is very petty." He praised Austin, saying if they wrestled again it would set a box office record. He said he'd never go to WCW. He said his biggest thrill was to headline WrestleMania this year against Austin and draw a record number. It was the most buys ever for a WWF pay-per-view event, but nowhere close to a record buy rate, without star power of outside celebrities. He said his best match was the rematch with Austin at Backlash. The Los Angeles Business Journal on November 18 ran a story about how SmackDown is turning things around on K-Corp, the local UPN affiliate. The ratings upturn is considered critical since the station owners, Chris Craft Industries, which owns 50% with Viacom owning the other 50%, as its percentage of the station on the block. The story noted the possibility due to federal regulations of the same company owning more than one broadcast network, since Viacom, which owns UPN, is in the process of buying the far more lucrative CBS, saying that if UPN could buy outright the remainder of the Los Angeles affiliate it would make it easier, if it has to divest itself of its network. The station charges $12,000 to $15,000 for a 30-second spot, as compared to $1,000 for a similar spot last season. In Los Angeles, the show is drawing a 6.0 rating. The station has also made it policy to run wrestling news and profiles during its 10 p.m. newscast every Thursday night, with the stories teased through SmackDown, to keep the audience. The result is the Thursday night newscasts are drawing double the ratings of any other night. Someone explain why this would be. A survey in the Philadelphia metro area showed that registered Republicans are 4 times as likely to order a pro wrestling pay-per-view event than registered Democrats. I have no idea why this would be, except it doesn't surprise me either. The New York Post reported that on October 18, FCC Commissioner Gloria Tristani called for pro wrestling organizations to move their shows out of prime time so the shows would be available to a smaller kids' audience. She did not suggest any federal regulations over wrestling or a ban of when it could air, asking for the TV networks to regulate themselves. She accused the pro wrestling industry of targeting children through their advertising and marketing. WWF Senior VP Jim Byrne responded, saying his company has already taken the high road because it saves its most risque material for after 10 p.m. Vince Russo is trying to sell WCW on the same specious argument that they can get more risque if they air it after 10 p.m. Generally speaking, of all the wrestling shows on television, which hour of what show do you think generally? It actually varies between 2 different hours, but one more than the other has the largest audience of kids watching. I bet I don't even have to answer that question. Shows this past week were SmackDown on October 12 in Birmingham drew 10,042, paying $298,618, and a house show on October 16 in Dayton drew 7,497, paying $204,929, headlined by Show Over Bossman and Dog Over Jericho. Rock vs. Bossman was advertised headliner, but Rock missed the show due to travel problems. For those 2 shows and the Raw, merchandise was $195,962 or $6.90 per head. The readers' pages. Russo. I'm not even sure that Russo and Ferrara can save WCW. They are obviously experienced writers with track records, but WWF is still missing what WWF has, wrestlers who can act and do interviews. Most WCW wrestlers who are good on the mic are the same ones who shouldn't be getting pushed because of their ages. The oversaturation of wrestling is already here. I wouldn't be surprised to see ratings for all the shows start to consistently drop. It's too much of the same thing over and over again, regardless of the promotion. WWF and WCW are on just too damn much. ECW, as spirited as it is, comes across as too minor league and won't be the savior unless it changes quickly. 6 months ago, I used to watch both Monday night shows and all the PPVs. Now I tape one Monday night show so I can fast forward through it and watch ECW and buy selective PPVs. I changed behavior unconsciously, but in retrospect, I think it's due to overkill. If WCW had come up with the Dup Brothers gimmick instead of ECW, Chris Benoit could be held up, Luger could be juiced up, and Hogan could be washed up, and most obviously, Hulk could be 3 stars up. Robert McMullen. Mountain View, California. Monsoon. Just a couple of corrections on your Gorilla Monsoon story. He lives in Moorestown, New Jersey, not Mooresville. He's lived there for 10 years, when he moved from nearby Willingboro. As I recall, about 30 years ago, Bruno Sammartino was wrestling Dynamite Joe Cox, a jobber, on TV. Cox brought a 2x4 to the ring and Monsoon walked fast into the ring, took the 2x4, and when everyone thought he would hit Bruno with it, he walked over to Bruno, said something and left the ring with the 2x4. The tag team that later beat up Monsoon with Bruno saving him was Ernie Ladd and Toru Tanaka. On a side note, I read WCW is expecting increased ratings starting October 18th due to the huge changes from Vince Russo. I don't see it. Most fans don't even know Vince Russo's name. Every businessman knows it is very easy to lose customers and next to impossible to get them back. Dave Katz. Mount Holly, New Jersey. I read of Gorilla Monsoon's death this morning with great sadness. Growing up in the Northeast, he was my first wrestling hero. I met him several times in public places such as dinners and stores, and he was always friendly and would spend as much time as you would want and answer every question I had. Dave Kerstetter. Burlington, New Jersey. Once again, the state of wrestling in the States is terrible. It's really sad that true wrestling fans have to look overseas for believable storylines and matches that make sense. I was sorry to hear about the death of Gorilla Monsoon. I never saw him in a match. I just saw old photos of him wrestling Bruno Sammartino. They looked like great battles. I never cared for him on the WWF telecasts, always shilling for Vince McMahon, but in my mind he'll always be the guy fighting Sammartino. Larry Floyd. St. Louis, Missouri. Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told. Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine.